Welcome, everyone. It's Tuesday, February 14th. It's Valentine's Day, and it's just after 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. And this is the ORMAP Parcel Fabric training. Good morning, Brett.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy birthday, Oregon.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, Oregon. I didn't realize that. So I was just playing around, having a discussion before we started, and with Robin, and we were talking about surveyors using the parcel fabric. And I wanted to go and demonstrate to her. This is actually one that I did for a county over in Wisconsin, and this is just the PLSS. But the interesting thing about this is that inside of here, they have the traditional types of PLSS. They have the townships and the sections and the quarter sections. They didn't include special surveys. Special surveys for a surveyor as it relates to PLSS are things like dependent and independent resurveys of the previously surveyed areas. They're not in here. But an interesting thing is that they had in this county, they had two different sets of survey information, because the commonly adopted PLSS corners from 1980s, they've gone through and done what is commonly referred to as a remonumentation project, where the surveyors went out and recollected the coordinate values for found monuments, and they basically did further research, and they actually wound up with two different sets of PLSS corners. One for those 1980s and then one for the newer ones, so that for the mapping component and for the surveying component, they actually had two sets of control points. So interesting example, and it just sort of was demonstrating how you can create one for the specifically for surveyors. I'm going to leave it at this. We'll talk about this later. All right. So hopefully everybody had a good weekend. Hopefully nobody bet anybody on any money on the Eagles for the Super Bowl. But like I said, hopefully you all had a great weekend, and we're all ready to do our third session relating to the parcel fabric. All right. So let's go and start up with homework. And as always, we want to go and get everybody here to go and participate in this. And this is just a general discussion. What did we learn last week in the two sessions? What did we find interesting? What are we going to use? Because there was a lot of material we were gone over, and everybody will participate at least once. So who wants to start?
This is Mike with DOR.
Hey, Mike.
Hi. What I liked was that ground to grid that we went over last week.
Ground to grid is, yes, I agree. And again, as a surveyor, I understand all the complexity of ground to grid, but I also know that just from a simple mapper standpoint, ground to grid is really, really important. And remember, we said that you can find ground to grid in two different places. One was on the edit tab here. And if you pull this down, this is where we go and we calculate what the offset is. And then the other place is down on the display area. There's actually that same toggle there for ground to grid. So it can be used for actually true ground to grid, where you're putting in place a scale factor and what's commonly called the lambda offset, or it could just be a different basis of bearings, where one deed calls out a bearing as a specific distance, but you know that the mapped might be projected to a grid and it's got a different bearing on. So for example, magnetic bearings or north bearings and assume bearings and bearings using different datums. Great tool. Please, I recommend that if you can, you use that on every single meets and bounds description that you're going and inputting. I know those of us that are non-surveyors that have learned mapping old school, we usually input it and then we rotate it. Well, ground to grid actually stores the rotation with every single line, and that's one reason to go and use it. Mike, thank you. That's a good one. Who wants to go next?
Jeff in Washington County.
Yes, go ahead.
I am really excited to say that I tried the planarizing on the broken curves and watched it snap back together and thought, yes.
Did it
solved the
work?
problem.
Yes. Yes. So I do want to warn you on that. Hey, Dean, how are you doing? I do want to warn you on that with the planarize, if you make that cluster tolerance too big, it kind of will move things. You know, it's really set up for just small areas. Interestingly, there is out on the community site, there's someone who actually put that up, and I suggested using planarize, and they tried it and said, no, it doesn't really work. And it was doing things he didn't want it to do. So it sort of has been poo-pooed and said, nah, that's not the full solution. But we found in our workflows, that seems to work most of the times. And it's an easier way to make sure that you can snap things because you're within tolerance.
I selected just the two arcs that had been separated out, and I used the default, which is 0.003, I think,
Right.
for the and no problems.
Yeah, if you use the default cluster tolerance, it should be fine. And by the way, that's the default cluster tolerance for your topology. So good, thank you. Next one.
Robert, DOR. I like the ability to use the spiral curves. I do a lot of inputs on highways, so spiral curve is a great input for us.
Yeah. Yeah, just remember that it's not a true spiral curve, it's their approximation of what that spiral curve is. But
at least it gives us an approximation.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Better than nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, great. Thanks. Who's next?
Hi, Viola Gunberg, Douglas County. So I'm just going to highlight one of the tools that'll be coming up in 3.0 from what you showed, and it'll be helpful for us, transfer parcels, knowing too that we do some stuff with, like, you know, like we'll maybe have something in parcels and something in streets, and seeing some of the tools that'll be coming up and being able to move from one parcel type to another will be really helpful.
Yeah, it is. The only downside that I've found to it is that the parcel that you're going to be using to transfer, you know, to sort of clip out of others and to add to others, it has to be defined as a parcel. It can't just be a polygon that you create. It has to be part of the parcel fabric. But other than that, it's a nice tool. I like it a lot. Thank you. Good one. Yeah. Have fun using it. Next.
Police at DOR.
Yes.
I was intrigued by the revisionary rights and storing that information in the parcel fabric.
Okay. Yes. So that's just built on that same transfer parcels. You're right. It's a really nice tool. Like I said, I like it a lot. When I first heard it and when they started talking to us about it, it's like, yeah, I don't know, because their concept was annexations, moving annexations and moving things between jurisdictional boundaries. And I never saw much use for it. But once they put it in place and said, this is another case where you might want to be able to use this, it's like, okay, now it clicked. Now I know what you're doing on this. Be aware on that transfer tools, the transfer parcels tool, it works really good if you've got sort of rectangular components on it. But once you get into, for example, lake boundaries or riparian rights, or you get into a cul-de-sac, it gets trickier as far as how it allocates and moves that revision back and forth. So just be aware of that there's little edge cases. And as surveyors, we're always looking for edge cases, things that don't fit. But yeah, for the most part, it's a good tool. It works well. Good.
Hey Frank, this is Daniel from Lane County. I really enjoyed learning about the new improved Traverse tool over the old Arc desktop Traverse.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't show, thank you, by the way. One thing I didn't show was inside the Traverse tool now, they have, so the way it works in Pro is that you start working, all right, and you draw the line. And every time you go and hit insert here, every time you hit enter, you know, every time you hit enter, boom, it actually creates. Did I set the start? Yeah. Why just give me a warning here? Why not have it on? Oh, I'm using, sorry. Let me go and set this up correctly. So every time you do that, it actually goes and creates the line. Now, older versions before 3.0, when it would create that line, it would redraw the map. So you create the line, it slightly redraw, and so there would be a lag. So if you're using this in 2.9, you can actually out type the Traverse tool. In 3.0, they tweak that to the point where it's really, really hard to go and out type the map when you're going in and putting it in. So I could go bing, 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 and it will not slow down, and it will always catch up to me. Another thing that is on, let me go and fix this, bothers me. Another thing that is fixed on the 3.1 update is with the Traverse tool, you can have a setting that says when you're going and inputting a Traverse that goes outside of your current view area to automatically pan to show you where the endpoint is. They've integrated that into the into here. Sorry. So Dean, here it is. Source type. All right. Yeah, so that's a nice improvement in 3.1, which is supposed to be coming out here in a couple weeks now. All right, next one.
I'll go, Wendy from Tillamook.
Wendy, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you. So one thing that I'm kind of excited about is the reconstruct boundaries, because I was a little troubled with the labels, you know, having one for each little piece. So I'm excited to reconstruct the boundaries and get just one label for the whole length of a boundary.
Yeah, and theoretically, this would only be for the parcels that you migrate over, because if you're going to build them in place, you know, in the new parcel fabric, you shouldn't be splitting lines up like that. But when you bring them over, you'll have, you know, all sorts of lines that are split and such, and it does a pretty good job. It's not 100%, but it does a really good job on it. Yep.
So this is Bryce from Harney County.
Yes, Bryce.
On the planarize tool in ArcMap, it would change the attributes. Is that the case?
No. No. There actually was an option inside of ArcMap to have it recalc the COGO values on here. And let's go back here and go to planarize. Let me see here. Where am I here? Planarize. So on here on planarize, there is no option anymore to recalculate automatically the COGO values on here. There are some tools for example, the line intersection tool allows you the option to say, well, recalc the values as I'm extending lines or intersecting them, but on planarized, there is not that option. And there is no default setting to tell it to automatically recalculate those values.
So other fields besides the Kogo attributes would also be removed or changed.
Such as,
Just
so on in ArcMap, they would change other
yes.
attributes. Really, no, they don't change on
Okay.
in ArcGIS Pro now. Yeah, interesting. We'll check that, but I don't think so. And there is a caveat there, unless you have an attribute rule set to automatically recalc things, then it will automatically go. Anytime you make a change to it, it will go and modify it. So John from Clackamas just says he's excited about the S key and the snap anchor or secondary anchor. Yeah, good, Josh. I actually like that. Matter of fact, I'm going to tell you a little bit of trivia. It was several years ago, right after we started testing ArcGIS Pro, that I happened to be at a conference with some of the Esri editor developers, and I mentioned that. I said that would be really good addition to go and put it on here because you've got it in ArcMap, and they were unaware that it was in ArcMap, and so I had them go and automatically put it into Pro, so it's in there now. Just let me go and mark you off. Okay, and also Susie, looking forward to using the ground grid as well. Denise from Benton, I know everyone already said this, but I'm looking forward to learning how to do the spiral curves. Learning how to do this. Yes, spiral curves. We're not going to cover how to do spiral curves other than saying that there is that function inside of here, which if you are creating a line, let's go and see what's going on here. If it lets me do this yet. If I am doing a line, now it doesn't form within here. Let me go and set this again. Sorry. Dean, are you watching?
So Frank, what I ended up doing is I ended up just calcing all the line types to be nothing, and it seemed to work. I'll try to replicate what you're doing right now. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's see if this does it. Let's go and set this to a default, which is I know is in there. So while we're going on that, Denise, let me go in and click on there, give you credit for that. Brittany from Columbia thought it was neat that there's an ability to allow multiple people to edit. They can be limited to only edit a particular jurisdiction area rather than, yeah, we were talking about Waukesha County and what we've done there and how we've set up a single county-wide parcel fabric, yet we've limited who can edit what as it relates to the individual municipalities. Yeah, and that was through attributes and setting up the way the ArcGIS parcel fabric allows you to go and do it. All right, Brittany, thank you. And Steve, the snap and the rotate, but they've been using it for months, and now I'm happy to find it's there. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Dean.
It's working fine for me. Typical answer from a developer. So I have the data set I uploaded to you yesterday and added lines and
it looks like it's working now for me. Yeah. So it looks like it's working. This is the holdover.
Okay.
Yeah. So that spiral curve, again, we're not going to go into the whole class about spiral curves, but just know that we can do a spiral curve, and we can go from 0 to 250 feet and tell what the arc length is. And these are the standard type of parameters in here, and tell it to go and create that. And if in fact you were in the middle of a traverse, it records both the primary radius and radius number 2 on here, and the arc length and everything else on there. But from a geometry standpoint, it does only go and provide you an approximation with short lines on here.
Frank, we are big on spiral curves in Oregon. John from Clackamas County actually wrote the ORMAP spiral curve as a prototype for ESRI, and my staff actually wrote the spiral curve for ArcInfo way back when, doing the benchmark for Washington County, Oregon. So,
Wow.
Spiral curves with ODOT and the railroads are big here. So that's, people seem to run into it a lot.
So curious, why is it bigger in Oregon than many other parts of the country? In Florida, it's almost non-existent.
We had thought it was primarily railroads, but we were shocked. Oregon Department of Transportation uses it for a lot of their stuff, and then that defines the right of ways. So
Right.
they use a spiral curve as part of their construction, and I think they do copy off the sides to do their right of ways. But it's actually, when dating myself a little bit back to the 80s, when we wrote the ArcInfo version, we actually built it out of the Oregon Surveyor's Handbook that ODOT uses. So a really talented guy, Michael Fitzgibbon, and David, we had a surveyor on our staff, and we had a great programmer. They actually wrote the spiral curve tool in ArcInfo over lunch during the benchmark.
Yeah.
But we were shocked. It's not that way in Washington. It's not that way in Idaho. Oregon, it's what Oregon Department of Transportation uses a lot, and consequently that defines right of ways. And then if anybody else in the group has anything to add, obviously my stuff is always ancient history, so I don't know about recent stuff. So anybody feel free to chime in.
So just sort of to let everybody know, so a spiral curve basically is a design that's used with high-speed transportation. So things like railroads, as they're going, you can't immediately go and transition from a straight line into a curve. The rail cars would flip over. So what they do is they transition it from basically none into something ever increasing sharper, and then going back out to none as they're going into curves. And this is usually denoted by using the degree of curve as one of the designators for there. And again, it's part of this high speed, and it's used on not just railroads, but also interstate highways. The federal DOT uses it to go and define off ramps and on ramps and those sorts of things. And it just depends upon how the individual states decide to integrate that in. But yeah, it's one of those things that most states, as far as cadastral mappers, they don't pay that much attention to. And again, maybe the state DOTs are defining the acquisitions differently than the actual, the overall design is. But yeah, it's as surveyors, we're very knowledgeable about it. We understand it, just like vertical curves. But yeah, it's
It's just a common thing in Oregon.
Interesting. So we also have Brent over in the chat window just said that he learns using the align parcels or rotate tools, often beneficial to turn off topology when editing with these tools. Let's go and modify that. It's with the align features tool, not the align parcels tool. The align parcels tool, you are going to have topology turned on. All right. And just sort of to show and what are we talking about here?
Why features? Okay.
Yeah, so in here, we've got a parcel, all right? We've got a polygon. And again, this is not parcel fabric right now. This component, and the reason why we're looking at this is because of the way topology works. And if I look over on my edit tab, I can see that I have a topology. So if I go in here and I decide to go and rotate this, all right, let's go back here and rotate this polygon here. And if I look over here, when I go to rotate, if I have topology turned on, it's actually analyzing using map topology. It's analyzing the intersections of everything I have turned on. So if I go to rotate, I will see that it's actually going to rotate this line and this line. It's going to attempt to go and move them. You can see it's going to go and move them as we're going. So if in fact I say, no, let's turn off topology and go to rotate. Now when we go to move, it will not look at the connections between them. It will only rotate what I have selected. And it's important because you want to recognize that while you're doing these adjustments, you have to think about, do I want it to adjust everything else or just my selected features? And that's how you differentiate between no topology and topology. And again, inside of here, it's actually, even though we have here rule-based topology, it's actually not using the rule-based topology, it's using the map topology to figure out what's connected to what else on here. Yeah, good insights.
That's in just parcel fabric?
No, that's Pro right now, ArcGIS Pro. The way it works, you automatically have this option to have map topology turned on. And if you have map topology on, when you go and move something, if I go and if I turn on map topology and go to move something, as I'm moving this, it's going to move everything that's connected to it. Map topology automatically analyzes what is nodes and edges on here, what's connected to what else, and it automatically moves those things that are connected until the point where it no longer affects it. So if you're looking, these two edges, they'll keep going until this point here crosses that line. Once it does, I break the map topology and say, I don't want to use it. So that, again, I'm going to go move this now. And as I'm moving it inside of this, it keeps doing it until one of my selected edges crosses another one, then it's gone. It's done. And notice it says here, the feature will cross something else. It will cross another feature, and it's not going to look at topology anymore. One of the ways that it works inside of Pro now.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah. Good point, though. And again,
Frank?
Yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I had a quick question about the rotate tool. This is actually the thing that most enlightened me last time, and I forgot which button to use. So I put the rotate tool where I want to rotate, and I get the red point where I want to snap to. And then I can zoom into the red point. And my question is, I forgot which button I push in order to rotate then.
So in order to rotate, and let's say I want this to be my snap point here, all right? So I can, again, wherever I have my cursor, at the time that I toggle my secondary anchor, that's where it's going to go and do that. By the way, this is map topology, so that's going to go in. Let's turn this off here. So when you go to rotate, you have to be careful where you're clicking the button to rotate. You have a couple of options. You can click it on this green ring, what I call the Fisher-Price ring, all right? You can click it on there, or you can click it on any of the things that are selected right now. So if I click over here, it will turn off my rotate. If I click on here, you'll see my cursor has changed, and now it will allow me to go and rotate it. So you have to be on one of the features which is selected. for it to actually go. And a good indicator is whether or not you see your cursor changed into the rotate button.
Wonderful. It's even easier than I thought. I was thinking I had to hold something down and it wasn't working, but thank you.
You just have to be over. And if I had a line, I'd have to be on that line. But this is a polygon, so I have to be on the polygon. It has to sense that you're on top of whatever is selected.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. All right. What else? Who do we got left?
This is Ivan, Wasco County. I was really interested. I like the Kogo type attribute.
Oh yes, one of my favorites. I am so glad that they finally put that in. And so within the Kogo type attributes, if I go in here and create a line, tax lines. All right, I have the ability anytime I implement something with Kogo, and I can do it with direction, I can do it with distance, I can do it with direction and distance, circular curves, spiral curves, anything I do with any of these Kogo constraints. All right, when I do it and hit enter, if I go and look at the selected components here, what did I do here? I thought I had told it to end. Source type. Boy, sorry about this. Yeah, when I do that, it goes and sets it. So that is actually a domain that's being set. Source type, here it is. Cancel those out and do this. That's a domain that's being set. And there's 3 values in there. The first value is entered. And entered means that you actually went and entered the Kogo values on here. The second option is from geometry. That from geometry basically means that you ran a calculation. You told it to go and update the Kogo and calculate it. The third option is computed, which means that in fact, it was entered, but something has happened to it since then, so that it's a proration. And that's an important component of here, because the computed variations are prorations. They are not actually the actual value on there. So let me go in here now and do this and see if I can do this again. Direction and distance, boom, there it is. Okay. Why are my 9s not showing up here? The scale dependency. I'm wondering why it doesn't show up. All right. So yeah, sorry. So the scale dependency is another option, but the Kogo types, just be aware that those are actually, the Kogo types are actually a domain that you can go and change the values on. If I go up here to my training, and actually look at my domains for here, I actually have Kogo type, and here's the 3 values on here. I could change them if I use different terminology for that. I could make it, and we have this down here in Florida on the entered values, we actually record that that is the record value. That is the recorded documented values on here. And from geometry, we use the terminology of inversed. That's an inversed value. And then the computed one, we leave it as is, but just be aware that that is a prorated value. That is not actually the length of the field, but a prorated off of the previously entered values. All right, so let's go keep going.
Hi,
So
Frank.
Rob-
This is Tim with Benton County.
Tim, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Here I am. So I learned that there should not be a line in parcel fabric unless it's associated with a polygon or it's a connection line.
Correct. And that's a good one that comes from sort of the definition of the parcel fabric. The parcel fabric is polygon based, and you shouldn't have lines unless they are associated with polygons. And even the connection lines are supposed to be associated with a polygon. All right. There's actually a rule that says, a validation rule that says that all features are supposed to be associated with a record, which brings up a really interesting point. We normally associate a line with a parcel, all right, a line with a polygon. But the reality is the way that the relationships work inside of the parcel fabric, lines are not related to polygons. Lines are related to records. And then the polygons are related to records, so that there's not a direct, but an indirect relationship between them. So everything has to be related to a record. Good point there. Thank you, Tim. Robin, it's small, but it's like the ability to customize attribute rules to include units, directions, rounded acres. Wonder what's similar to the alias name of the fields and once can be used as labels. I agree, but it's not small. It's actually big, that you can actually configure your database to go and work the way you want it to do. I'm going to tell you something that hopefully someone tomorrow goes and says, oh, I didn't know that. Inside of ArcGIS Pro, remember the COGO values are all stored as number fields and such. Inside of ArcGIS Pro, everything is stored in meters. All right, so that the distance field is actually stored in meters, but Pro actually works similar to the way Microsoft Excel does. They store it in one value, but they present it back to you in the value that you set. So in this data design fields, you have the ability to tell it that even though the distance is coming back as one thing, you could tell it what you want it to be represented as. And you have the ability on, for example, numeric, you can tell it you wanted 2 decimal places, you want the thousands, and how you want it to be reflected back to you. All right. But the reality is that inside, everything is stored as meters on here. By the way, the other thing is the direction field. The direction field actually has the ability to go and be stored as currency or numbers or whatever on here. It is a numeric field, but in fact, there is a new type of representation called a direction, and you can set it as a direction field. You tell it you want it to have decimal degrees instead of gons or radians, and whether it's north azimuth or south or polar, and quadrant bearing. So you can tell it exactly how to represent it when it comes in here, so that the directions, the bearings that we're looking at are quadrant bearings, and we want those direction fields to be represented that way. All right. it's Robin, that's not a small point. That's a big point. That's a big change in the way they go and do things inside of here. All right. Who else do we have? Do we have anybody else? Elise, have I heard from you, or Scott, or Dean?
Hey,
Dean, go
Dean
ahead.
from Lynn County. I learned that in the parcel fabric, but not ArcGIS Pro, I think, Kogo values are being stored as a number format instead of string, which is useful for querying, I suppose.
Yeah, so you're kind of right, but not quite, because it's both in Pro and in the parcel fabric. The only place where the parcel fabric differentiates or is different from Pro is that it's taking care of those Kogo type fields, and it's storing that value on there. But ArcGIS Pro has, in fact, the ability to store them as numbers, and you represent how many decimal places and such on there.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's building back on what Robin said. Elise, are you here?
Yes, I had a comment early on about the revisionary rights being stored.
Thank you. I missed that, and I forgot to write down that. I give you credit on that one. Suzanne Irwin, Susie Irwin.
Frank, I think Susie put hers in the chat early on.
You're right. You're right. Thank you.
She likes the ground to grid.
Round the
Snap.
grid. Thank you. Thank you. So who do we have left? Andy from Clackamas?
Hi.
Did I miss you? Yep.
Mine were all taken. So instead of talking about what I learned, I was wondering maybe you could just really briefly explain how to get good values to use for ground to grid. Is that something? Because that can be tricky. I've put in the wrong values and gotten really wacky results. So I don't know if you have any tips.
So let's start with the fact there's two different ways to use ground to grid. One is from a cartographer standpoint. The other is from sort of a survey or geodesist standpoint. All right, let's look at this simple one. The cartographer standpoint. A cartographer is going to want to put ground to grid in place when in fact there is a bearing reference that says something like north bearing or magnetic bearing or an assumed bearing. There's a bearing reference inside of a meets and bounds description that you know is not the same as the grid bearing that you have stored all your data in. It's at that point that you would use ground to grid to go and tell it, in fact, here is the bearing that's listed on my deed, on my legal description. All right, maybe it's listed as being north, 15 degrees east. And then you tell it what that bearing is on your actual data on the grid, and it will calculate the difference between that bearing and the bearing that you're going to be inputting. All right. Simplest way to go and use that. And that's the way that most parcel mappers will use ground to grid is on that.
Right.
They will use a grid factor of 1, meaning they're not going to make any real scale factor analysis on here. Okay. And again, I recommend you use ground to grid literally anytime you have a meets and bounds description. Okay. So the second one, the one that's going to require a little bit more explanation. Recognize that ground to grid, we are measuring on the ground, we are mapping on the ground, but everything is being projected to the grid.
Right.
By the way, one of the surveyor's dirty little secrets is that most modern surveys, you will have ground distances, but you may have grid bearings on them. So just be aware of that. So the way this works, and this is a huge exaggeration on here, that's the surface of the Earth. All right. And against that surface of the Earth, we are going to be mapping on the grid. That's our grid on here. So that we have to recognize that certain things will happen. There will be a difference between the ground distances and the grid distances, and it depends upon where we are relative to the central meridian of our projection. With the central meridian of our projection, the difference between ground and grid is 0, because the central meridian is where everything gets projected off of.
Right.
However, so by the way, you need to know what type of projection you're going to be using, because some projections have single central meridians, other have double, like ours equal area actually has 2 different central meridians. So you just want to know where it is relative to that. So that's the first thing, is that the actual scale factor has to do with the differences between ground distances and grid distances. Well, let's take an example here. Let's look at the distance of this line here on the ground, all right, versus the difference here. So the difference is depending upon how far away the 2 points are from the central meridian, all right? And from that and the other parameters of the projection, you can calculate what the scale factor might be. Usually what will happen is, because we are mapping a small area against the projection system, there would be a small little difference in there. And that difference from a cartographic standpoint is handled on, sort of the difference between what we measure on the ground and what it's shown on the map. And we'll, to be quite candid, we'll stretch or we'll shrink it to fit into the positions that we think it's supposed to go. All right. For most, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. For example, down here in where I am in Florida, we use a transverse Mercator projection, and we actually have 3 different zones in Florida. We have the East Transverse Mercator, the West Transverse Mercator, and then we have in the Northern Panhandle, we have a conic projection on there. So you sort of have to know where you're at, where your central meridian is. But the difference between ground and grid, where I am right now, is about 1700ths in a mile. So if I'm measuring out a mile, there might be 0.17 difference between the ground and the grid in here. And if I'm mapping out things that are that large, I would probably take that into account when I'm doing this. And usually the surveyor will go and provide a project scale factor, meaning my overall project has a scale factor for me, and you input that in to this area here where it says scale factor. That's the distance factor. That's your scale factor between the two. In order to really understand it, you need to understand what's the projection you're using, where is the central meridian on that, and in fact, how far from the central meridian is the line that you're drawing, or more precisely, if you're looking at it at a very geodetic level, the 2 points on there, because quite literally every single point has a different scale factor. As you move away from the central meridian, they all have a different scale factor on them. So you're asking me how to calculate it. The best I could go and tell you is that there are calculations that you can do, but they differ for every single projection out there. But you need to understand that it's not trivial to go and calculate the scale factor on every single point. However, and this is one of those areas where I've wished that Esri would be better at this, again, both from a surveying or from a geodesist standpoint. Why can't Esri go and build in the ability to calculate the scale factor?
Yeah, seriously.
They have the projection parameters in there. Why not? They know where the central meridians are. Why not go and have it so that as you're going out, you can see oh, that's the scale factor for this line, and automatically have it go and change
Right.
from ground to grid. They should do that. They don't.
There must be some reason, right? I mean, it's not like they haven't thought of
Well,
that.
I honestly think that the reason is because not only are they using the actual data's projection information, but they are projecting on the fly. So that
right.
my overall map document may have a different projection than my actual data included inside of there. And they will do approximations of this projection on the fly between coordinate systems. Dean, I just went and touched on the subject. Go ahead, add in.
Ages ago, we actually were quite concerned about this when we started mapping at Polk. And we actually calculated from the Oregon North State Plain, but using the average elevation and the average location for the centroid of every single map that we map. And then that became a value we stored with the map. So when you were on a map, you always knew it's ground to grid. Once we got all our data put together, we found out just using a basis of bearing on map was a whole lot more straightforward and simpler. And we said, okay, set the basis of bearing where you're at, and you're set to go. You know, the scale factor, the impact of the scale factor, you've got to have such long surveys for it to really impact that. We just bagged that and just said, well, if we just focus on the basis of bearing, set your basis of bearing. And the other part is if you rotate into your base map, and our base map is as accurate as we can make it, we've made an assumption that our map is managed in a correct ground to grid format, and it's good enough. And so we ended up leaving it to the cartographer's discretion, because frankly, they got too confused by saying the rest of it. We do rotate all of our maps in Polk County when we publish them. And I think it's like 1.28 degrees. And we do that because that was the average across all of our maps to get us to true. So our maps are published in true, but stored in grid. So just a couple of things that we played around with. And in fact, when you're publishing your maps, you do have the ability in the layout to store the rotation angle. And that's one of the things that is in the data design for ORMAP. So if you're really hot on saying, okay, I'm going to store a grounded grid angle, you could actually use that from the map index polygon. It's an attribute that's in the design. I'm just waiting for someone to use or not. But just a couple things that we found over time. We were quite concerned when we started building our map. And I think it was a big important part of construction. But once it's constructed, you're always rotating. Essentially, you're rotating into grid from when you put it in. So just a couple comments.
And just to build on that, and because right now I had to address the scale factor on ground to grid on here, but there's also an angular component on here. In that, this is the approximation of the Earth. This is the equator on here. What is this here? What is it, right? It's the North Pole or Santa's Village, either one. So, but the reality is that north on the grid, all right, we have to recognize that north on a grid is if this was the grid here, north would come out this way, but the reality is north is actually a curve here. So the further away you get from, again, the central meridian, the more curvature there is, the more difference there is between north on whatever grid you are and the actual perpendicular to the equator on that component. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity built in there. You got to realize that as Dean says, when you're building, you want to be constructed with that. But once you've got the overall parameters, from a cartography standpoint, you're working in small areas, worry about the difference between the bearings that are referenced and what your grid bearings are, and that's good enough for you.
Got it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can tell I used to have nights full of lectures on that, so.
It's very helpful to me.
I,
Thank you.
and actually, I think Oregon has, and I haven't looked at this for a while, Frank, but I think Oregon in the last few years has actually extended out the Oregon State Plane System, where they have small polygons that are very, very accurate. And it's a new, essentially, it's a different coordinate system. So I think the biggest issue that we run into is that make sure you're really clear with your surveyors if you're getting control points and you're getting surveys from them, that you kind of come to what that compromise is and what's going to work and best represent their data. And if you've got surveyors that are going to build a control network and a plat-based system with all of their surveys, road realignment and the like, that you want to give them the flexibility to do that, but just make sure you have a way to crosswalk.
Yeah.
So, and I know, Robin, that's something you'll be looking at with your surveyor as you develop a control system for them.
Yeah, good points, and interesting discussion, not having to do much about parcel fabric, but an interesting discussion on here. As I said, down here in Florida, we don't worry about it that much because the difference in elevation is only about 140, 150 foot of difference in elevation, because we are a big giant sandbar down here. There is no mountains. There aren't even hills down here. It's flat for all intents and purposes. All right, I think all we have left is Scott and Andy. Scott, do you have anything that you had picked up before or during this discussion? I don't see Scott here. And Andy.
Oh, I just asked that question about
There you
ground
go.
grid.
Thank you, Andy. Sorry.
No problem.
All right, so whole lot of discussion. Again, some of it pertains to the parcel fabric, some of it does not pertain to the parcel fabric, but it is important, and we want to make sure that you become as knowledgeable as possible on this. So let's go back here. Where were we? Some of the tools, ground the grid, copy lines 2. This is again parcel fabric component on here. So far we have looked at Traverse tool, which is not parcel fabric, but the parcel fabric does listen, and when you build lines, it marks the COGO type on here. Ground to grid, not parcel fabric. That is just a standard ArcGIS Pro tool on here. The copy lines 2, yes, that is purely parcel fabric, and it will go and utilize your parcels and the lines associated with it to go and create new ones. Change parcel type is a way to go and transfer parcels between the different parcel types or layers. Duplicate parcel, we talked about that, and that it allows you to go and create a copy of the parcel on there. Set historic and set current on here. Create seeds, goes through and analyzes the lines that are related to your current and active record and determines whether or not they can form closed polygons. It does not check to see that the lines close on the ends. It just checks to see whether it forms a closed polygon. Shrink to seed. I try to tell people to be very careful when you're attempting to go and use this, only because the earlier versions would let you shrink to seed, and then you would actually not be able to rebuild it. So you want to make sure that you have an active record set on here. Reconstruct from seed is something that's new in ArcGIS Pro 3.x. And it allows you to go and build a seed from non-associated lines. So you can actually go and, remember we had that discussion about overlapping lines and shared lines. It basically allows you to create a parcel with shared lines on there. Delete parcels. This is in fact a tool that allows you to delete not just the selected parcel, but the lines that are associated with that selected parcel on here, but it does not delete the record. And that's because that record might be associated with other parcels on here. Merge points. We talked a little bit about here. I do want to go and show you again in here. One of the things you might do, for example, let's say that this is, I don't even know if this is or not, if there's a polygon here. There is a polygon, there is a tax lot here. So let's see if there's another area here. Here it is. We've got 2 points in here. All right, these 2 points. All right, if we go in here and do a quality driven merge points, we can go in here and say, select these 2 points, and it will analyze them and give me a demonstration of when I choose and merge the points together, it will go and move the lines, move the polygons to go and match and merge those points and create 1 point instead. In this case, if I click here, it will merge these 2 points together, merge that line into here. It does not recalculate COGO values though, so you want to be aware of that. This should not be used for large lines. You can do it, but you shouldn't be doing it to go and merge lines. But this is a quality-driven workflow, not a record-driven workflow. There is no active record right now. I'm fixing things. I'm not actually looking for it to record what I do. Just I'm fixing things that had problems with them. Merge boundaries is similar to this in that it will take lines and look at lines and determine whether or not they have the same bearing or whether there's an offset is the way it describes them. And if they match inside the tolerance for that offset, it will merge them together and create 1 line there. This was an early tool. It's still here. I don't recommend you use it much at all, only because it doesn't recalc COGOs. And there's other issues with it on there. Simplify by straight lines and curves. This is a tool that's used to clean up data, but be careful with it. Be careful with it because we've found that these settings are very, very tricky. And if you don't have something specifically set up for your data, it might take straight lines and make them curves on here, and it may not actually fix those densified curves or other lines on here. This is a tricky tool. It's used. Reconstruct boundaries. I think I showed that previously. This is in 3.x. Your parcel fabric has to be a parcel fabric 5, and it allows to go and rebuild this. This is a really nice tool for this, and it primarily is for going and working with old data. And I'm going to take this back, and also working with shared lines. So in fact, this might have been a shared line for this lot, shared line here, and it will go back and look and analyze and reconstruct them to make them 1 line on there. There's an interesting discussion going on, by the way, just to give you a little insight with between the dev team and some of us here, and Dean, I think this came up at holistic testing as far as whether or not it should reset the actual direction of the line depending upon when it rebuilds it. So in this case, this line, this top line here went from this side to here. This line went from this side to here. But as it relates to this parcel here, the line actually goes here to here. It resets the label, but the question is, should it reset the line? Should it flip the line and make it go in the right direction? And there's a discussion going back and forth about that. Interesting. You can actually get reconstruct boundaries in 2.9 if you want it. But there's it was beta back then, but it was actually included with all the code for 2.9. And you actually have to do a sort of, you have to go into registry editor to go and expose it and then be able to use the tool.
Okay, I sort of love that, just to be honest. It almost makes me want to sort of do that. But I'm techie enough to manage it.
Well, Bila, the one thing you want to remember about that 2.9 code, that was the initial code, so you could consider it development code on there. There's been refinements on it to sort of take care of some of the edge cases, but just be aware, the core code is back there at 2.9. And what's the worst it's going to do? It's going to rewrite some of your labels and rebuild them. That's all.
Yeah, it would be interesting to play with it before moving to 3 is all.
Yeah. And again, so here are the instructions on how to go and do that. You install the tool by going and changing the registry key on here. Then you enable the boundaries on here. You actually create a separate custom component for beta, and then you add the tool to that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Not tough. In the labeling expressions, just know that at 3.9, they went from the previous labeling into this new one called, in which they have 3 positions. They have Kogo right, Kogo left, and Kogo shared. And we'll go and analyze your lines and tell you whether or not these Kogo values are the same on both sides of the line, or whether or not they're shared, in which case it will go and label it only once on there. Let's take a minute here and move back a little bit, and let's show this label here. All right. So in here, yeah, here's the labels. Let's go in here and look at the labels and explore this a little bit more. And this is using Arcade on here. And while I have some slides on Arcade, and Arcade is pretty amazing what they're doing with it. Let's just explore this a little bit. So the labeling expression now is actually pretty interesting. If you're a hack at writing code, in which they set a bunch of parameters as far as what types of labels are you going to have. For example, is it in fact, are you looking for quadrant bearings? That's set to true. It will go and do it. Otherwise, it will give you false. It will give you north azimuth, whether or not you want to show the direction, whether or not you want to show the distance. These are all flags that you set on here. So those are the primary flags on here. Also, the colors, these are variables, the formats, whether you want 2 decimal places or 3. These are all the distance color. What color do you want it? And what density do you want it on here? Whether or not the curve parameters, whether you only have partial Kogo in here. These are all set by flags on here. Then we have variables that are set up on here and goes down. It actually, this Arcade function actually goes and calculates the Kogo values, the equivalency of the quadrant bearing off of what's stored in the direction field. It does not use the presentation mode. It actually calculates them. Same thing with the values for the Kogo and direction fields. It calculates all of it. The curve parameters on here and such, and then it actually goes and actually assembles the label string that gets shown up here. And it says whether or not it's a curve, and if it's empty, it's not a curve, and then what is it going to set on here? and the direction and the distance. So this is what it's actually returning, the calculated direction string and the distance. All right. So it's, again, if you're interested in arcade and how this all works, this is a really, really interesting code on here. But let's just go and show you what this means. So if I go in here, and by the way, there are 3 different classes on here, the ones that are shown on the right side, the left side, and shared. So you actually have to make any changes 3 times, 1 for each of those. So if I go up here and say, I want this to be quadrant bearing distances and the direction, maybe I don't want the direction to be shown, I can type in false here for my flag, sorry, false, and tell it to apply it. When it applies it, note it does not show the bearing on here. However, when that does that, it doesn't necessarily remove the space for the bearing. It leaves it there. And if you'll note here, it's located closer to the line than it is here, because this actually has the space for the actual bearing to be on here. So if you always want it to not show the bearing, the recommendation is to go down here to the actual bottom where it's actually making it together and says, instead of showing the direction field with, by the way, this /n is in fact a new line, tell it to just go and remove that and tell it to apply that value. And now you see it's going to be closer to the line. So the label expression not just calculates what values are going to be shown up there, but where they're going to be placed on there. I find that interesting. I find it, one of the most interesting components on how to go and set up your project file and your parcel fabric as you're going through. Just a little tip there. And you have to do that for each of these classes. So I would have to go and set it up for Cogo left, Cogo right. A little tip. These label expressions are exactly the same. So fix it on one, copy the entire thing, paste it in the other 3 classes. So it's set up exactly the same. Any comments, any questions on that?
Just brilliant. I just always love looking at arcade code and diving into it and sort of seeing how it pops out the stuff. I agree. I think it's just wonderful. And it
Yeah.
just sort of shows that underlying architecture that they utilize with some of this data.
Yeah.
So.
And just to give a shout out, this is actually written by Jason Camarada. And good code. I like it. Dean, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I had not thought of using the arcade code in labels. And in fact, if you can just quickly show the map, the county map, the ORMAP config map, and
Yep.
then go down to tax lot labels.
Labels here.
Yeah, turn on labels. No, all up at the top so we can see all the labels that are available. I'm sorry, the 4th tab over in the table of contents.
Table of contents.
Yeah, go up. Keep going up, keep going up.
I'm up to the
Yep,
top.
Yep, no, what now? All the way over. You were on the top one. Show the label parameters for all of the layers.
The little thing that looks like a little tag.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
The little tag.
Sorry. The button here, yeah.
Okay, right now, that's in the design. And I did not use arcade because I really turned this over to my cartographers and said, you define the properties about how you want it labeled for each of those. But I think I may throw arcade in there. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Because the label size is dependent on the piece of annotation, or based on the line that you're in. The line knows what map it's in. It knows the map scale because it knows the underlying map boundary polygon. The map polygon knows its scale, and away we go. And that's something that I'll show. And so Frank, I don't know how long you're gonna let me talk about the tools, but we will talk about that a little bit later on this morning. So just sort of a heads up that we've gone relatively simple on the labeling, but folks that want to get into some arcade, that's a great place to do it.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, and Dean, I'll let you talk as long as you want on here. And yeah, let's go back here and look at this. Just something you do want to go and be aware of. And let me just copy this code again.
One of the frustrating thoughts, and I don't know if they added it in 3.1, in Python, within the Esri environment, the conversion to, again, the lines have the actual angle as stored, not the bearing and distance that you typically see. So you've got a lot of code there that does that conversion.
Right.
That doesn't exist in Python. And there had been a request to make that arcade code reflect that. I don't know if that's in 3.1 or not. I've not checked. That's one of the things.
It is not
annoying. So
Yeah.
Lila, when you get into doing this, you can see there's a lot of complexity to the code.
Yeah.
In this arcade, simply converting the numeric value that's an attribute for the line bearing to a typical bearing distance, degree, minute, second sort of deal with the north and the west. And that's all that stuff there.
Yeah.
So, and that's simply,
yeah.
you just cut and paste that.
Yeah, it's cool. I also like the line that you had highlighted earlier up there, Frank. It's so like that's off of my findings of playing around with arcade too, is that fact of the integration of HTML tags and things like that, like the font name Arial size 10. I've utilized utilized those HTML tags with BOL with doing bold versus not bold and other things like that. And like I said, it's just such a flexible language. So anybody that's on the call, like dive into it. They have some good arcade code classes and things like that. Esri does. I picked up like a guidebook by, I think it's a GIS guidebook that I also have like sitting around over on another desk over there. That actually goes through all these different arcade pieces and lets you begin to actually play around with it. This is a nice little piece of work. I like it.
Yeah, and just to pick up on this label code, this is that line right here that I have highlighted. That's actually the line that actually sets the font name and the size. If you want to change the size of the fonts, all you have to do is change that one code and it changes it all over. Or
that's pretty cool.
And not only that, because labels are display dependent, you can actually set code which changes the label size as you zoom in and out, not just setting the actual displaying, but what it actually displays depending on. So it could get even more complex, but labels are so much more functional than they used to be before. Yeah, just putting that out there.
And for me, that intelligence is something that I want to use to populate the annotation feature classes.
Yes.
So I'm looking at it is that I'm actually building a lot of shortcuts for my cartographers because they're going to be in Anno for some things or most things. And in that particular case, the more I can feed them the information from the label environment as accurately as possible, the better it's going to be. So just good stuff.
It is.
This is actually a question about you, Frank and Dean. So it like it sounds like you're talking a little bit about maybe like moving towards like having Anno in some instances, and in other instances, maybe utilizing the dynamic labeling, such as with like distance bearing here. Does the Maplex engine work well enough with trying to tie the two around each other, or does it get a little clunky?
Not for my cartographers. They spent a lot of time testing it.
Okay.
We looked at this because obviously labels would be a whole lot more fun than Anno because you don't have to do anything. But my cartographers,
I mean, it's for us, it's going to
they
be a
have
little.
they have a cartographic art license that they want to do when displaying bearings and distances associated with it. And when you start messing around with subdivisions that have a lot of 1 foot offsets or whatever, very tiny curves, they want all that information there. Maplex isn't going to place it so it looks good. But we actually run that and place it all. It looks gunky, but it's a whole lot easier to move a piece of text a bit after that happens, and then it is to retype it in or whatever. So we actually have done it that way. Obviously, with some of the new tools in 3.1 with placement, maybe you then can move the label placement, and that's where it's at. I still, the real issue for me, it gets back into is that Anno for my cartographers is what was it when record was done? Now, what is it now? Now after adjustment, what is it from record? And that's, you get into games there. And so, and again, I'm looking at it as the labeling engine, especially with Maplex, and the stuff Frank has showed us is that's how I'm going to feed my Anno. So it saves my cartographer a ton of work.
Okay, good to know.
And this is where we get into that really sticky discussion here, but I've learned from the past. I'm going to be careful with what I say. So I do have several clients that, because of concerns about Anno, what they've done is instead of taking and placing Anno, they put a point where they want the label to appear. And we have attribute rules that says rather than putting a piece of Anno there, you put a point there, and the point automatically pulls all of the information from the lines to go, including the line rotation, including the font size and such, the COGO values that's being pulled over. It sets all of that so that they now use line labels or excuse me, they use point labels. And with the point labels, they now have that flexibility of doing display scales. So you don't have to set multiple annotation classes. And they tell it that if it's at a certain scale, the font size should be this. If it comes down, its font size should be this. So that's all attribution of the point for the label. It's just a different approach, but I can say it's not at the same level of cartography as what I've seen the ORMAP people doing right now. So, but it is an interesting approach. And I'm constantly looking for how can you get innovative with what we do as cadastralists, that sort of thing.
During our, I was going to say during our conversion process over for our team, that is precisely actually what I was playing around with, because I moved all of our annotation over from our previous product to Esri, and it all got imported as points. And then so I was playing around with labeling utilizing points. They eventually got moved over to proper annotation, but I've been able to see that, and I can sort of see also with integration of some decent arcade code and things like that. You can definitely like play around with it and institute different ways for cartographers to be able to play around with the features while making it a lot more lightweight than dealing with like basically like essentially like 1.5 million annotation points in a map for such a large county. So I mean, yeah.
My problem with Anno is that Anno is not responsive to scale. And as cartographers, and I've got limited cartographic history, but as cartographers, we often will represent things at multiple scales. And what I really dislike is the fact that you have to duplicate ANO on multiple scales if you want it to be represented the same feature. And that just seems to me to be a waste, and there should be a better way to represent that. And that's all I'm going to say. So I don't get in any more trouble.
And just so I know that a lot of cartographers may look at that arcade and be overwhelmed. But this is a difference between the ORMAP add-in environment that we had before and where we're at now in Pro. So you will get the tools and the templates that replicate what the basics you had in ORMAP. But if you can engage your GIS staff, or if you want to get more up to speed on arcade, it's not overly difficult. And you can do a lot with a small amount of code, which is both good and bad. But it is something that as you start looking at, and I know yesterday I spent some time with Lane County, it is definitely something that rather than just saying, okay, we're going to jump to ArcPro, we're all done. I keep coming back. The recommendation is download some of your data, do some conversions, play around, test out the different things that are there, test out the tools. Obviously, if the tools committee doesn't have tools you need, we have money, we can make better tools, we can upgrade tools. It's all there to make that happen. I know that Wendy, we were talking about when we talk layout a little bit later, that there are some things that for some of the exception maps that we need to look at. Don't look at those things that you get here and say, well, wait a minute, I need arcade code. The tools committee is there to help you guys do that. So if your GIS staff is not available, we do have funding from Phil with ORMAP that tool committee members can help you do that. And the goal of the tools committee, the goal of ORMAP and making this is so we all move and we all have productive tools that we're using and can share. And so again, don't look at that and go, oh my God, that was just a heck of a lot of code. And I'm never going to touch that. Well, you don't have to. That's why we have a tools committee. And that's why if you have GIS support staff, that's why they're there. And there's money to make this happen. So as you're looking at these tools, as you're looking at, we go through the class and say, you know, that's close, but that's not what I need. Keep a list, because we can come back as the tools committee to upgrade tools, to make more specific tools so that you can do production. That's, you know, those of you that have been in the technical meetings with Phil, we just got a chunk more money that helps us do that, so that it isn't the big lift of going for a grant proposal. You can go to the tools committee and say, look, can you help me out? How many hours is it going to take? And the tools committee has a pretty condensed process to help you with that work. So again, don't be intimidated by it. It's not as bad as it looks. And I know that's easy for me to say. But on the other hand, there are resources there to help you do that. And there's funding. So don't be put off by just saying, I'm not doing any of that. Look at it. And if it's not meeting your needs, then let's change what we're doing. And that's my, my ORMAP commercial. Thanks, Frank. Sorry.
Well, and that's important, because I'm going to say something now to reinforce that. Because the reality is, one of the things you're going to have to recognize is that the difference between ArcMap, again, 20-year-old technology, and ArcGIS Pro now, is the difference between a black and white television with rabbit ears and smart TVs that you have on your wall right now. So much different, so much more capability, so many more things that you can be doing with it. And we're just trying to go and expose you to some of it, that yes, you can do the same thing you used to do before. You could tune into a local channel and you can wait and get, the media that you're looking for when it's done there. ArcMap, you can do a lot of things in there, but it was pretty primitive. You could get it expanded, and ORMAP tools, it was good at what they could do. They now have tools. They now have the bones, the structure, the code that you can do so much more with it now. You can actually put some intelligence into this. And you have the benefit of having the tools committee and the work that they've done. I'm super impressed by what you've been able to put together and how much understanding you have of the parcel fabric. And really, my job on this was just to show you sort of the bones, show you the structure, show you how it works in the background, so that you had a little bit richer understanding of, oh, this is not ArcMap on steroids. This is a whole new thing here that we're dealing with. But it looks enough like it that we can pick it up pretty quickly and just move forward and just, use some of the other migration that others have done to learn and say, well, what else can we do with this? What else can we go and put in here on here? I can tell you right now I have several clients, especially down here in Florida, where we are doing 2.5D parcel mapping. We're mapping units, we're mapping floors, we're mapping all kinds of things in here because these structures are now in place that we can go and do this, something that we could only dream about before on there. All right, let's move forward. Anything else on here? Any other on here? Okay, so by the way, Dean, I can give you at least an hour. You want an hour and a half this afternoon? We can do that also. It's up to you.
An hour is good. I'm kind of
Okay.
timed it, so probably 11 to 12 is good then.
Yeah.
Because we're just morning, right?
Yeah.
And I apologize about tomorrow. I have
No need.
commitments from my
No need.
commissioners, and when they call, I go.
No need. No need. You're good. You're good. All right. So let's look here at, this is a pro tool. Comes in pro. We don't have to, there's no difference in here. This is the divide tool on here. And this is a really nice tool. And it is one of the core tools that as cartographers, we're going to be using this for mapping things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and build a line. All right, I'm going to go and create a line. I can use the traverse on here. I can do however I want. Let's go ahead and create a record just to so it can track this a little bit and get the parcel fabric involved in this. And let's go to traverse and let's hope that this is working now. And let's just go due east and for 805 feet. All right, 805 feet on here. So what this allows us to do is the divide tool is what I'm talking about now. The divide tool allows us to go and take a single or multiple lines and divide them. All right. So let's start with the simplest stuff, the simple single line. If I wish to take this line and I wish to go and cut something out of here, let's say I had to take the westerly 100 feet of this. It's as simple as going and putting in here 100 feet. And note down here with this check, it's showing me a preview of what that 100 feet is going to be. And again, what Esri has done in this transition from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro is they've taken the tools, reevaluated the functionality of what they were doing, and tried to consolidate them all into one single tool. What that means is that we used to know the old names and we don't know what the new name is. You want to think about the functionality of what you're going to do and then follow that. Previously, for example, there was about 5 different divide tools. There was proportionate divide, there was divide polygons, all kinds of things. There was multiple divide tools. There's now one divide tool. And that one divide tool, the software, ArcGIS Pro, understands whether you have selected a line or whether you have selected polygons, and it automatically gives you the options on those. So for example, if I were to switch between here, the polygon, when I click on the polygon, it automatically knows, oh, this is not a line, this is a polygon that you're going to divide, and gives me options for polygons. Or when I click back here, it says, okay, here's your line options. It's beginning to have some ability in here to understand what you're doing. So let's go and put in 100 feet here and let it show us what it's doing. So here are the different methods for dividing things. We can divide with distances, we could divide it into equal parts, and we could divide it into percentages. When I mentioned earlier, you could do multiples. That multiples cannot work with distances. It only works with equal parts and percentages. But it does work with more than one. And I'll show you how from a PLSS standpoint, that's a really interesting component. But let's talk about distances first. So I can set up, I want to divide this up by using defined distances. And I can tell it from the start or from the end. And you'll see that on the preview, it's telling me which end it's going to start at and where it's going to divide from. And then I have 3 choices. I can do single distance, which is what this. I could do equal distances, and these equal distances have on it the number of times it repeats. So I could have 100, but I want to repeat that 6 times. So I could have equal distance, the same distance multiple times that I want to go and repeat it on here. It's the second option on here. Or the third option on here is I can do differing distances on here. Let's say it's 100 feet once and then 200 feet. Let's take that 200 feet and do it 3 times on here. Now notice with all of these 3 differences, when I put those values in, it would tell me not just what I'm cutting, but what's left on there. All right, so what I'm cutting and what's left on here. So in this case, it's telling me that so far, my total length is 805 feet. I have got the sum of 700 feet, which leaves 105 feet remaining. With all of these multiple values, it also gives me the ability to scroll down a little bit more to go and distribute the remaining area proportional. So if I have a shortage or an overage in the differences between how much is being divided by and what's actually on that line at the moment, this will take up and proportionally distribute those remaining distances on here. All right, so in this case, I can tell it, and again, I'm exaggerating this just so you can see how this works, that I want one distance that's 100 of the total, and I want 3 distances of 200. And when I say distribute it, notice it has gone and distributed that proportion throughout there. And when I click on divide, what will happen is it will go and take that and create these 4 segments. They will have stored on them the COGO values that I input, but they will be a different length. All right. So there they are. And if I look at the attributes here, I can see that that 100 feet, all right, actually, if I look at my shape length, shape length is actually 115 feet on there. The 200-foot segments are actually 230 feet on here. So it proportionally distributed the overages or shortages between what I defined that line should be divided into. Maybe quiet so someone can ask a question. No questions? Oh, okay. So,
I have a question. Can you hear
yes,
me? It's Denise
yes.
from Bay County. Oh, good. I got my microphone working. So why is it labeling on the line 100 and then 200, 200, 200 instead of 115, 230, and 230? Or is that going to change at some point? And
In this case, all right, so this is, think of this, we had an earlier discussion about ground to grid distance and how the lines are not always going to reflect what that document or what that deed says or what that plat says.
okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay, it's going to show you the COGO values that are stored on here, but it's going to actually divide it up and distribute the ground to grid. Let's look at it that way. Or the differences between the deeded distances and what it's actually mapped as. It's going to go and distribute that and report that to you. But it's again only going to label it with the COGO values on there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's leave it at that. Yes.
Frank, I found that when I do the divide tool, if I don't enter that remainder, then that tail will end up with no dimension.
Which release are you using?
We're using 2.9.
Yeah, that has been fixed.
Okay, awesome.
Yep. Yep, that has been fixed. That was one of the complaints previously. If you had this, if you had a line and you did a divide on it, all right, that line, when you went to divide it, by the way, let's go back to 1. You could often just put in here 100 and the 100 would save, but that would not. That's with 2.9. With 3.x and above, it actually goes and retains that and calculates it all for you. Yeah, don't have to worry about it. With 3.0 and above, it does that. All right. So let me take 2 lines. All right. And now I can divide them into 2 different. All right. So it will automatically do, if I have multiples selected, it will automatically let me do equal parts or percentages of those multiples on here. Again, because it's just taking those lines and dividing them up according to those percentages of what they overall are. So again, with the divide tool at 3.0 and above, you can take the multiples of the lines and divide it up and use that. So that, for example, and let's go in and take and delete these 2 in here. Let's go and create a really simple and representation of a section. All right. This is a section. Let's pretend. And let's say we are tasked with going and dividing that section. And let's further define, this is a regular section. This is not in the closing. It's not a closing section. It's not a fractional section. It's a regular section. So that normally the rules would be, you take that section and you take the distances and divide them in half between the corners. And hopefully you have monuments representing those corners. And from that, you would then go and connect the lines to be able to break it down into quarters. Again, there's all sorts of other rules, but let's just say this is it. All right, so in this case, we want to go and take and divide this into equal parts, and we want to divide it into 2 equal parts here. All right. And let's get off of divide because it's going to try to keep doing that. We now have that broken down into equal parts on here, so that all we have to do is literally go in here and say, let's go and connect up this to this. By the way, let me go and show you something. Let me go and undo that one right here. Let me go and show you a little tip on here with Pro. With Pro, when we're doing a line, specifically a 2-point line, we have the ability to go and do that. And then once we've gone and done that, if we want to create a new line, we have to go here and say, nope, cancel that. Now let's start a new one. Well, we can actually go to this options here. Under the options, we have the ability to go and automatically have it populate specific values in my attributes, or if I click on the line, I can tell it whether or not I want that to continue or whether I want to go and have each one of them created separately. So that now when I go in here and do this, I can say here to here. Sorry. I can say here to here. And then here to here. So if I'm creating a series of recurring lines and I don't want them to automatically be rubber sheeted together or rubber banded together, I could go and do that. And again, then I could go in here and I can select these and I could planarize these on here. Go to planarize. Have it automatically go and planarize it up for me. Planarize them all in. If I had COGO values on there, it would automatically calculate those COGO values. I could create seeds and I could go and build my polygons from that. All right, so learning to use the actual tools inside of Pro and all of the abilities on here, it's just, it can make it so much faster and so much easier for you. All right, I'm going to do a couple things here. I now have, let's go and select, by the way, it's planarized. Let's go in here and select that one polygon here and show you the division of polygons. So now that I have a polygon selected, my divide tool no longer shows me those line divisions, but now it shows me polygon divisions. In this case, I can do proportional area, I can do equal area, or I can do an equal width. This equal width one is the one that becomes interesting. Because, for example, if I have an aliquot description, one which is a proportionate of something else, which is what aliquot means. It's French for a portion of. And let's say it's dividing, and let me go and measure something just so I can see what my scale is here. Okay, so let's say that we wish to go and do the eastern 1,000 feet of this parcel, the east 1,000 feet. What I could do is I can say, take my polygon and I can say divide it into equal widths and do 1,000 feet, all right? And now tell it, I wish to go and do 1,000 feet from this line, all right? And did I measure 1,000 feet? It was 300. Do eastern 100 feet, sorry. 100 feet of that overall 300-foot distance on there. So it will allow me to see what that is. And I can actually go and tell it, well, wait a minute, I don't want that. I want the northern 100 feet, or maybe I want the eastern 100 feet, or the southern 100 feet on here. Or maybe I have a different bearing and it gives me a specific bearing and says, I want it 100 feet from that line that I'm drawing. So this divide tool allows me to go and automatically define a perpendicular distance to the line that I tell it I want to go and create this distance from. All right, so in this case, it's the western 100 feet of this parcel. And it is not measuring this, it's actually being perpendicular to the line that I'm clicking it on and dividing it out. And when I click on divide, reminder, I have an active record right now. When I click on divide, watch what happens here and watch what happens at the ends of those lines. All right. When I click on that, it divided my selected polygon, but more importantly, it actually created a point at the end, and it created a new line in here. Created a new line for that. Right, so it did a split, an aliquot split on here, created those two, and I automatically did that. So the divide tool can be used for dividing lines up if you're building things from lines, or it can be used for dividing polygons up if you've got some sort of an aliquot description on there. However, it only works with a single line. If I were to have multiple lines that I wanted to go and measure from, it won't do that. You have to do it in multiple times. Secondly, if there's a curve or anything in there, it won't do that. It's only straight lines that'll do that from. If you want to go parallel to that and do some sort of aliquot breakdown off of a curved line, you actually have to create the lines and then use those to go and split. Any questions? Divide tool. One of the more interesting tools inside of it, and that's Pro. That's not the Fabric. The only thing the Fabric is when I divided the polygon, it created the line and it created the points. There should be a question here. When it divided that polygon, and again, it divided the polygon on here, created the polygon, it created that line on here. What did it do with that line and that line? That should be the question. What did it do? Here's what it did. Nothing. It did not, because you don't have to split lines where they intersect to create parcels. Is that good or bad? It's a rhetorical question, but the question is that good or bad? I've had some clients say, oh, that's bad. You can't do that. We want to see what that split is. We want to see what that dimension is. The reality is that that dimension is not listed on the deed. It says that the line here should be 100 feet west or easterly of and parallel to that other boundary. So there's no 100 point whatever there. Doesn't give you a dimension here. Doesn't give you a dimension here. Do you really need to split that line? You don't.
Well, it would depend on what your overall topology is, Frank, on everything, wouldn't it?
Well, build on that a little bit.
Whether you have to have an intersection that all of your lines have to have intersections or not.
Right, but that's a business decision. That's not necessarily
exactly.
Yeah,
it's a business decision. It's a case by case. It's how you want to set your own topology up.
Right. So if we were doing this by lines, and let's just go back here and say, let's divide this here. All right. If we were doing this with lines, what I would have done is I would have gone and said, okay, take this parcel. Let's go ahead and do a copy lines to. So we have the lines now. All right. We have the lines, and it's only showing us what is part of our current record, which were these also. So now I have to go and create a line that is parallel to that line. All right. Parallel to that line. And there is a parallel to tool. You know, I always have a problem finding the tools in here. Well, it turns out that there is this I can search. I say copy parallel. All right, and I can tell it that I want this to be a tax line. By the way, I really think that Esri should just say whatever you have selected, that's what it should be copying it to. And I want to do 100 feet. All right, and I only want to do it on, is it the right side or the left side? Let's see here. On here. Why is it showing me one or the other? I think this is, oh, this is going this way, so it's going to be on the left side on here. Do it one time, say go ahead and copy it, and it will copy that line. Why is it copying? I must have something else on here. I did. That's something else on here. Copy. Sorry. I had something else that was selected here. All right, so if I go copy parallel here and tax lot line source, I don't care about that. Up 100 feet.
You have two selected lines and they're going in opposite directions.
Oh, I do, don't I? Thank you. I wasn't even looking down here. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. So now let's go on the right side. Let's go and do copy parallel. There you go. So there's my copy parallel. I now have to do, I have to go and make sure that it extends and trims correctly. All right. And there are a couple tools here. There is the extend and trim tool. This is a really nice tool because it allows me to go and extend and trim without a selection. So I don't have to have anything selected here. And I can tell it that I want to go in here and I want to go and extend. And as I move my cursor over the line, it will show me it's going to extend that line to there. And then I go down here and I can, as I move a cursor over it, it says it's going to trim that line and I can trim that. That still doesn't go and divide those other lines on here. So let me go and undo the extend trims. All right. There is another tool here called line intersection. Now what that line intersection allows me to do, and this is again, recalculate my COGO values, create new lines when extending. Well, let's just go and extend or do a line intersection from this line to this line. There it is there. Go ahead and click on it. It goes and extends it. This line to this line. Go ahead and click it there and go and extend it. So now if I go and look, I have two lines there because I had those multiple lines in here. I had that one, which is a longer one. I should have probably eliminated, but I kept that records. So it has split that line into smaller ones when I did the line intersect. It also did the southern line, and it did not trim this line. I instead actually have to go and delete that on my own. So there's a couple different tools that we could use. There's the extend trim, which is the one that when you begin to use Pro, you intuitively think that's the better solution. But the actual is that the line intersection tool has been enhanced to the point where it's so much better than it was in Pro that that's the one you probably should be using if you go and do this on here. All right, we're coming up. Yes.
I got a question about that real quick.
Good.
This is Dean from Lane County. Does the intersection where you extended the line out to the other edge create a vertex at the point that the line used to be, like the extend tool does?
You can see me printing on here already?
That's handy. Thanks.
Again, they've listened to us. They've listened to us on here. So no, it does not. It actually is a clean extend and trim now. And so with the extend trim tool would actually just extend it. This one actually goes and redefines it to there, to those intersection points. All right. We were coming up now on, let me see, this is now 10 o'clock your time. Let's take a break here. Let's take a 15 or 20-minute break. What's it going
20
to be?
sounds good.
20. Let's take a 20-minute break. We'll come back here at 20 after the hour, and we'll do a little bit more discussion about these tools, demonstrate how to use them a little bit more, and then we'll let Dean give us a discussion about the ORMAP cartography tools on here. Think about questions about what I've shown, what we've talked about, and we'll start up again in 20 after. All right. All right, we are back. So while we were away at the break, did anyone think of any questions or any comments on anything that we had talked about so far this morning? None. Okay. All right. Hopefully somebody else is back here and I'm not just talking to myself. There we go, Dean. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just you, Frank, just talking away.
You know, I have to tell you. So, a quick little story. I've done some extended training using Zoom, and about a year and a half ago, I did some E911 coordinator training in which we talked about ArcGIS Pro and utilizing some of the solutions that are out there. And nobody had webcams. Nobody. So that I could see that there was somebody there, but everybody had turned their mics off so that I couldn't see anything or do anything. And this training consisted of, much like this, it was about 8 hours of training spanning a couple days. And the people that were participating were, I understand they were very busy, but I couldn't tell. So literally it felt like 8 hours of talking to myself because I was really struggling to get any responses from anybody. So I have this fear that I'll be talking and training somebody and they won't be there anymore. They just aren't there anymore. So I'm very thankful for any time anybody turns their webcam on and talks. I know it's on the recording, but please don't be shy. It needs to be interactive. We need to have discussion back and forth because that's really how we learn things. Thank you, Dean.
I got a
Thank you.
question.
Yes, Dean, go ahead.
So we just went over the divide tool, and
Yes.
I can see how the divide tool would be useful for especially that, kind of like the western 100 feet of given parcel.
Right.
Practical applications for the divide tool other than that.
Divide
So
of the
I
polygon, that's sort of the most so let me say this. Let me go in and undo. Let me go in. Let me finish this one here. Let me create the seeds. Let me go and build this. And then let me go in and one more thing. So while I don't use this on any other components, we have several clients that have found the way that they use the divide tool against polygons. Divide tool against lines are that's pretty self-obvious what you use it for. But they've used it against polygons in that they'll have a specific parcel or proportional area. So for example, if the legal description says the north 5 acres of an area, or the north, in this case, let's say the north 4,000 square feet, because we don't have acres on here. But it will go and what they'll use is they'll use this divide tool and doing it into equal areas in which they'll divide it into acreage, and they'll do it in, for example, the north 1 acre of this parcel. And it works the same way. You tell it the actual area that you want to divide it into and how you want to go and handle everything else. And then you tell it the edge from which you want it to be measured. All right. And it will go and create that. I struggle with it because from the surveying standpoint, that's not exactly the way it normally works. And so that an acre definition of a parcel is really tough to go and identify specifically where that thing is. And it's dependent upon the actual sides with the actual configuration of the shape and such. So yes, you can use this tool for that on there. I also have other clients. So for the acreage, so if you have a legal description that says north X acres of a parcel, you can do that. It's usually not a simple
Frank,
calculation. Yes.
Frank
Go ahead.
has a cartographer. We do get deeds that do say that a lot. The northerly, so many feet, square feet, or acreage of this aliquot portion of the
section
quarter of a
Yeah.
section or something like that. So yeah, we do get that, and that's where this type of tool comes in very handy for that. You don't have to sit there and try and divide it all out. This
Right.
tool comes in very handy for that. You don't have to do the math on it yourself. This tool's very handy for that and takes care of it for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it does do that. The only difference in the only thing I see is missing on here is the fact that it only works against a straight line. All right. It should have more flexibility in there. It should allow you to do not just a line with a single boundary, but maybe a curved line or whatever, so that it makes it a little bit easier. The other way in which I have clients that use this is they'll go and they'll talk about proportional area when they have a proportional share. If they have, for example, a parent deeding half of their land to their children, and there's 2 children, they'll actually divide it into proportional 2 different places, and that's really not the correct way to do that. But I have clients that use this tool to go and do that also. So there are others besides just, as an aliquot of number of feet on there. But the feet is the easiest one to go and talk about, the easiest one to describe what's going on there. But yeah, good question, Dean. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Let's go and continue then. Divide polygons, we talked about quite a bit. The split tool. The split tool actually, again, this is a pro tool. This is not Parcel Fabric, but if you have a Parcel Fabric and you have an active record, it will do additional things. So the split tool allows you to go and split one of 2 ways. You can split it interactively, in which you actually go and draw the line to split. All right, and it will go and draw the line and split the line. And it will create, if you have in the parcel fabric and you have an active record, it will create a new line for that. The interesting thing about this is that that line that's created, if I go in here and select that line, all right, that line that created is actually a polyline. It is not a 2-point line. So it is a polyline on there with no COGO values on there. So the split tools can be used a lot when you've got natural boundaries in here, in which it's going to the edge of the water, or it's got some other boundary. You just have that other boundary underneath it, and you can use either interactively, or if you have another feature that you've got drawn here. Let's say I actually went and created, and I can get rid of this here. I went and created a line. No, I created a polygon here. Create a polygon. Right, to have that polygon selected, I could then go in here and say, create this by, or split this by a feature. I would go and tell it, this is the feature I want to split, and my target is going to be that polygon, and it will go and split it between them two. All right. This polygon is not impacted at all. It's just used to go and split the one underneath there. Let's go and delete that just so we can see it actually goes and splits it. I did not have an active record, so it did not create lines or points in there. But the split tool is actually a really nice enhancement to this. And when you combine it with the parcel fabric, it makes it easier to go and create what often were very difficult parcels to go and modify and create. So the split tool inside the parcel fabric, and just regularly the split tool, so let's save that. The split tool itself actually is a nice enhancement in ArcGIS Pro. All right. Adjust parcels. This is where we were starting the other day. We started to demonstrate this, and this is where we want to make sure we understand all the elements of it. All right. So let's start and create a parcel. And let's create a new record on here. And just create this record. And we're going to go real simply go and create a polygon. And from that polygon, we're going to go and let's create it a little bit closer here. Let's say I do a meets and bounds description in here, and it wind up with a polygon that looks like that. And I can go and build this out. There's my polygon. It has lines. If I go and say, select everything that's part of that active record, it will then go and tell me that it created 5 points, created 5 lines, and created 1 parcel on here. So when you are working workflows here, you now have to go in and make sure that these things are contiguous with one another, and unless it's actually supposed to do this, it does not create gaps or overlaps inside of here. So the Align Parcels tool is the way in which you do that. So the Align Parcel tool allows you to go and adjust and move those things that are currently selected. And in this case, I selected my parcel that I just created. And it will go and calculate where the points and the lines are supposed to go relative to the surrounding areas. And remember that it's going to go and adjust whatever is selected at the moment. So if I were to go and say, well, I don't want to select my new thing and adjust that to fit the old. Instead, I want the old to go and adjust. In that case, I would tell it to toggle between the new and the old. And when I click on the toggle, it will go and calculate and select what's adjacent to it. And I'm going to go back to that, to my currently active record on here. So that's the first part, is figuring out what you want to adjust. And then secondly, determining the tolerance, the links within here, this buffer, as far as how far out it's going to search for links. In this case, because I was so sloppy in putting it in here, let's go and say, for example, a 25-foot buffer. Well, I'm actually looking to capture that point there, so it's going to have to be a little bit bigger than that. Say 35 feet here. All right. So what I want to do is I want to look at A, what's going to get adjusted, B, what my tolerance is for my links. Now, this tolerance and the links are going to be between existing points and new points. So it will be between that point and this point, this point and this point, this point and this point. There are no points over here. So I can tell it to automatically generate these links if I want, or I can go and add them in myself and adjust them. Let's go in and say, let's automatically adjust them on here. Now, on here, you will see that it created these anchors here to not move them. This is one of the things you want to be aware of. Those points are not necessarily, they've not found any links in there. So you want to be careful with that. If I look and I see there are no links, for example, this point should be going to this point here. All right. Now, let me go and do it, and it will go and adjust it so that that line gets automatically moved to there. So the symbology is telling me what's got links on it, what doesn't have links on it, where it's going to go, whether I created a link or whether it automatically is created. By the way, it uses two feature classes that are temporary in nature. The anchor points, whether I create an anchor point to say, don't move this, and the links. And the links will either be generated, all other values, or digitized. This is a digitized one. This is one that's generated on here. And that will show me where those links came from. Be aware that after I make an adjustment, those features that are in that links table disappear. They get recreated each time on here. So let's go and generate this again, let it go and show me that's where it's going to go and move these things and put it in here. Now, in this case, this boundary is a straight boundary. So I don't have any real issues with points that aren't necessarily moving next to one another. But if I did this point to edge, this is going to go and take points and move them so they're coincident with edges. And the easiest way to understand what's going on here is that this portion of this tool is actually the transform portion of a tool. This is actually made up of two different tools. One is the transform, one is the align features. And so you actually have two settings you want to be aware of. In this case, this is the linkages between points, and this is whether or not it's creating and making sure the lines themselves are contiguous on here. My recommendation is whatever you set this to, set this bottom one to also, just to make sure that it will go and adjust it, and then go ahead and click align, and it moved it in place there. Lots of questions about this. This is, by the way, the most challenging of all the tools that are inside the parcel fabric. How do you get these things to align correctly on here? A lot of people, when they first start, they get frustrated with it. But you have to understand there's 3 elements you want to look at. You want to look at what's selected, what the tolerance buffer is, and generate those to see where it's going to go and whether or not you have it all in there. And then finally, what the point to edge snapping is for the align features. Questions, comments?
Hi, so I think I brought this up before. So I think there's two pieces of the puzzle. Like I think like the left-hand side of this has typically not been too hard for us to do. The right side, on the other hand, sometimes it just doesn't move those points, and that's what I'm trying to gather about what the definition or how to handle, like making them move it automatically, like you had it do there, versus keeping them where they're at. And I don't know if you have to just delete those as anchor points or how that works. And I feel like I've just had them before just sometimes stick where they're at, and I'm trying to figure that out. The second question I have is, I think a lot of times it's easy enough to move the new tax lot to the old, but sometimes we get these weird tweaks and everything like that, trying to move the old to the new. And I mean, and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about these tweaks of like, not just also like, okay, we want to just move just the boundary to it, but we don't want to move every other attached like point of every other parcel. Like this one here would pick up the 3 or 4 parcels, or like basically all those running parcels, it would pick them up one way or another. And then sometimes you're trying to do unaligned parcels, it would start like deforming other points on there too. And we'd be like, hey, hold on, we don't want to do that much. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So I'll share with you some recommendations I made recently to a client. There are times when it's super easy to use this tool, this align features tool. All right. There are times when, yeah, it makes sense. But however, there are other times when it doesn't make sense because either your alignment that you're looking to do is just too complicated, or, for example, if you had a golf course boundary, lots of really small lines and really small elements in here, there are times when it just isn't worth the squeeze. The juice is not worth doing and trying to use this tool. It might be better to go and use a different tool or a different approach to it. So let's look at this. Let's get off of here. And let's say I wanted to go and let's turn this off and turn this off. So I had a parcel like this, right? And I wanted to go and figure out, how do I adjust this by myself? And I've tried a line and it just isn't working. You have to remember one thing, that the topology is going to go and be working for you. Notice I didn't have topology on here. I used the align parcels, and it actually allowed me to go and move these things without topology because it was using the parcel fabric. Some of the other tools will allow me to, others won't. So if I were to have to go and move this again, and for example, the align parcels tool, when I went in here and moved this, it took all of these and moved them as I would have tried to do that. Perhaps it's more of a problem. If I want to know and define exactly where that point is supposed to go, or that point is supposed to go, I might have to establish an anchor with it, or I might have to do some things differently on there. It's hard to say. There's so many variables in here as far as what actually gets adjusted. My recommendation is start with the align parcels. If you can't get the results that you want, don't keep beating your head against the wall. All right, let it go. Let it go, as Elsa says. All right. So instead, look at, well, What about if I go and use some of the other tools that are available? For example, what about merge points? If I merge points in here, I could say, well, I want these two to come together. All right. And these are parcel fabric. These are part of that. So I can define whether they're going to go to 1 or 2 for these areas right in here. Maybe that's a good way to go and do this. Maybe I want this part, that point, to move up to there. Now, remember, I don't have topology turned on. So certain things happened, certain things didn't happen. Let me go back here. All right. Let me go and do merge points again. But this time, let me turn on topology. And again, it doesn't matter which of them, as long as I turn on topology on here. When I do merge points here, thank you very much. Let's go back here and undo that again. All right, now let's do merge points and see if it actually does this. Go to 2. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to do this. I don't know whether there's something weird here or not. Doesn't do that. So, you know, I want to figure out how am I going to go and do this. You want to look at the individual elements to determine how do I want this to go and be corrected. Let's assume. Let's triage this. First, you move the points. All right. I'm moving this point up to here. I want to go and take that point and move it down to 1. All right. So I want to move it down to here. So then I have to fix, well, what about this one here? What about this in here? How do I go and move that? I would use align features on that. Now, again, align features will go and move things according to the path that I draw. All right, and it's going to go and it's probably going to be 25 feet here, looking at what I've got. And I can draw and say, I want this to be the definition of where I want these boundaries to be. And what this will do is this will move all vertices, vertex, 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 vertex. It will move all vertices to the path that I draw. It moves them perpendicular to that path. All right. So I go in here and say, that's maybe where I want this thing to go. And you know what? I've got topology drawn. Let's turn off topology. Remember what I first said is that topology depends on what tool you're going to use as far as whether it's going to help you or not. In this case, I don't want it to look at connectivity. I want it to just move the features inside of there and move them over. Not editable. What layer is not editable? I think we had this yesterday also. Sorry. Oh, I think it was a tax code. And I might have had that turned. It shouldn't be doing that. I remember we had this issue yesterday with this, but it should automatically go and move these over to there without this. All right, so it would move that point over to here. Let's go and tell it only do what I have selected on here. And let's go and select these and see if we can make this work better. Let's go and select these. Now let's go and do align features. Only do it with my selection. See if I still get this error message. I am. Why is it not editable? Are there points in here which are defined as being? I don't know. I don't know why this is failing. Done this before, but again, I don't know why that's failing. Let's go and try it without points. Points are not turned on. Let's do align features. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on with this data set, but it should allow me to go and automatically go and move this on here. Again, not sure why that's doing that. So align features is another option on here. This is the most frustrating component of parcel fabric is, and excuse me, and not just parcel fabric, of parcels and parcel mapping, is when you want to go and align things up, how do you align them up on here? This is, why is this, is it doing it with everything in here? Turn points on. So if I just draw this in here, try this one more time. I'm not sure what's going on here. Why it's not working in this data set, I'm not sure. But it does work. And again, that's sort of, you need to go through that logic to try to figure out how you're going to make that adjustment. It is, use the align parcels first. If you can't do that, look at merge points in there. If you can't do that, look at align features on there and see if you can get it to move that way. That's really the ways that I would go and do this. All right, hopefully that answered your question a little bit. This is the most frustrating tool in here. Like I said, it's, if you begin to understand how it works, it really is two tools. It's a transform tool and the align parcels or align features tool. It begins to make a little bit more sense. Here's the align features tool here. Not sure why it's not working.
So why wouldn't you just redraw it in instead of
You could, but what we were attempting to do is not just redraw it in, but adjust the other elements in here. And even without that, I should be able to go in here and let's go back here a couple times.
I mean, you could draw that in a couple of seconds.
Let me go back here, still through the adjust. It's not necessarily that, yeah, it's not necessarily that it's the redrawing of this, but it's sometimes you have to align your existing features to go and fit against that. And that's where you're going to use those alignment tools more than anything else. Redrawing it in, again, it may fit that the information you have, the deed information, doesn't fit within your existing parcels and how it's actually gone and drawn on there. So you do have to go and make adjustments on them. So not just this one, it's, you may have to go and make adjustments throughout here.
Frank,
Yes.
Brent here. How might the edit vertices tool come into play in this situation here?
Well, not as much as you think. And by the way, that reminds me, there are other tools in here besides just that. So I could go and edit vertex, in which maybe I have a polygon here and I can right click and say edit vertices, and I can edit this. This used to be sort of the way that we used to fix things inside of ArcMap, not real efficient at all, because you often would excuse me, you would leave gaps and overlaps and things like that in here. If you want to deal with things like that, maybe what you do is, and again, maybe if I create a gap in here, I edit vertices and I'm only editing that selected one, and I create a gap in here. Well, I could go and use a different tool. I could use an align edge tool here. Align edge, if I have map topology turned on. And the align edge tool, what that does is, as it goes and analyzes as I move my cursor over an edge, it says the line, the edge that's being shown in solid will move to the one that's shown in dashed. So in this case, I can click on that solid line and it will be moving over. What the heck is going on here? Could anybody? No, I don't think anybody, no one else is editing this, are they? I wonder if somebody, I'm working out of a file geodatabase that's stored on Dropbox, and I don't think anybody else is working out of Dropbox, but right now there's a lock on here for some reason. So anyway, I could use align edge, which would go and allow me to go and line that over. That's another tool that you've got, but that works only if you have map topology turned on. If you align edge actually used to be in ArcMap, but it was a little bit more difficult to use. You'd have to go and select edges and things like that. Dean, help me here.
I don't know why, because you're in your map configuration, not in my map configuration. That shouldn't make any difference. But I think the bottom line with all of these tools is that, and as cartographers move to pro, I'm back to the rabbit ears to comparison to the TV. All of your ArcMap tools, redraw the line, move vertices, all of the things that we have done traditionally in the past will all still work. And what's really important is, and I went through oh my gosh, I went through a 6-month process in ArcMap, adjusting boundaries between zoning layer and tax lots in ArcMap. And it was one of the longest 6 months of my life, working with staff, trying to deal with all the little gaps and laps and making sure everything worked. I throw parcel fabric out of the issue and throw parcels out. Just aligning two adjacent features. You now got 3 or 4 new commands that are unbelievable to make those, where you can make the decision as to which point is moving to which point, how far out the points you want to move, what do you want to do, the surrounding lines. Oh my gosh. So I don't look at this as being, this is all going to replace what I'm doing. These are added tools. And it's, again, why getting the information, why we set up this class is so that you folks can see some new efficiencies, and it's going to take time. And like I say, having spent that 6 months with 2 staff people cleaning up zoning on aligning my zoning polygons to my tax lot lines and my map boundaries against my tax lot boundaries, what a nightmare. And so using these tools and then understanding the relationship of those tools to topology, go for it. And if it doesn't, and it's not that a line is always going to work, and it's not that snapping to vertice is always going to work, and it's not that reading the line is not going to work. These are all tools in your toolbox to map as efficiently as possible. Now we got more tools, and one of the slowest processes that we have, in addition to just cogoing the feature in, is how do we efficiently put it in the map in a way that we can replicate or document that we followed a process. Now you have more tools. And I think that's that's what I take out. And Frank, I apologize. I don't know why the edit's not there. I have my homework for the night.
Yeah, I'm
See
gonna
what-
make
see
sure
if I can
before
replicate
tomorrow.
this. So
Before tomorrow, that's going to be fixed. And I apologize. I apologize for this issue. It's going to be fixed before tomorrow. But in the meantime, I'm going to stop talking for the day, and I'm going to go let Dean take over. All right. So I'm whipped right now. I can't figure out why this isn't working correctly in this data set, but I know it works. I love this. The align features tool. I love that. That has saved hours and hours of work. Just that one simple tool. These new tools are just unbelievable what they can do. So with that, I'm going to stop.
Frank,
Yes.
This is Robert from DOR. Just one thing before Dean jumps in here, I'd like to say, I've had a few classes now through Esri with the parcel fabric and other things with the new ARC Pro. And I know as a cartographer, a lot of things is the repetitive use of getting used to the new tools.
Yes.
And so for me, a lot of it, I've taken some of the stuff that they've given me and I've gone back in and I've redone the exercises more and more to get used to some of the new tools, where they're located, how they work in that. And so I would just suggest using the repetitiveness of doing that exercises more and more to get used to how they work and because they are different, they do work differently, and you do have to figure out which ones are better for what you want to do, because as you said, they do work differently between them.
Yeah, it's like, and again, I use the earlier metaphor of television and how we get our media in here. It's similar to like automobile technology. I mean, ArcMap was the Model T. It works simple. It was very easy to understand. We're now dealing with a Mercedes, or we're dealing with something, the new F-150s that have electric batteries all over the place. It's like completely new as far as the code, the technology, how it works. It does the same sort of thing, but it uses new techniques to go and do it. And you just have to learn those tools and the new techniques. It's well worth it, but you got to learn them. Okay, Dean, I'm going to stop sharing. You can start sharing now and take it away.
Okay, so can everybody see I think I have the wrong screen. Share screen, screen to share. So is everybody seeing this ArcMap Tools Fabric class PowerPoint?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first thing, so I'm just going to go through, I sent this out last night to all class participants. I'm just going to walk through this PowerPoint as an outline, and it also gives you a way to crosswalk from the ORMAP tools to the ArcPro tools. And we'll just give it a shot and I'll walk through that. The first thing I would do is I would go to the ORMAP tools GitHub site. That's on that first page all by itself, all alone, so that you would do that. The GitHub site is our tools committee's way of communicating with you. So our last update was 9/28/2022. We've been testing 3.0 and 3.1 since that time, getting ready for new tools. We have some training materials. If you want to look at Esri's workflow, prepare and publish the fabric. If you want to look at migrating issues, they're both there. There's two, and thank you to Brian and Wilson over in Clatsop. He set all this up. It's just the best. So I made a bunch of videos. He made a YouTube channel for us. And we have two sets of videos. That's this link that it's just tutorials with narration, or if you just want to see a short video of how it is there, that's there as well. And as we move forward, you can download just the design if you want to see the design without anything else, the basic attributes and feature class structure, it's there. If you want to download the pilot data, this is what Frank's stuff is all based on. If you want to download the latest tools, the latest rules, the latest add-ins, and so forth. So there are 2 add-ins. I'm going to go over one, which is the arrow tool. I'm not going to go over the cancel number. I've never used the cancel number tool, but those of you that have, it operates very similar. Those of you who want to pass geekiness on to your developers, you can have folks if they want to modify add-ins and so forth. So take a look at that, and that's going to get you going on this stuff. And really take a look at the videos. They're going to be far more thought out than what we're going to go through. So with that in mind, the next page in the video and the next page in the PowerPoint is the crosswalk. So these basically are the ORMAP tools that we originally created. And up at the top is then, do we have a script, a Python script, a rule, a task, if it's built into ESRI as a function, or if it's now going to be an add-in. And so please look at that. That's how we're accomplishing our tasks. The only task that isn't done yet is the export to gold tool, which we'll get there. But the arrow tools are add-ins. Some of these tools like combine is now an ESRI function. And so we don't have a combined tool. Map production is now an ESRI, is now built in. The annotation tools are handled with tasks. And there's a one-to-many going from labels, moving labels to annotation is another tool. And then there's a CMAP tool. And those are tasks. And a few of these things are scripts. So I'm just going to walk through those. I'm not the trainer that Frank is. So I tend to talk too fast. So don't raise your hand, just come online, and or if you see that somebody in the chat put something there, stop me because I'll probably be going too fast. So the first thing we're going to hit is the annotation rules. So the annotation rules originally was set up that we wanted to toggle auto updates, and we wanted to replace, and we've replaced those with Arcade. And we've also replaced the auto update itself with it's built into the ESRI software now. But the tools we have is that when you place annotation, it will get the underlying map number for you. That also works with tax lot number anno. When you update a tax lot, it will automatically update the county map number. It will get your county name. It will update the ORMAP number, the or tax lot number, and so forth. And in cartographic lines, it will grab the map number and the map scale. And so I'll just show you, and down the end of this page are just a really brief, quick example of an arcade and how you get to those. So let's close my, so I'm not distracted, and I'm going to bring up, so what you're seeing is just a standard R session. This is, I took Frank's and I brought it down local, and we're looking at the ORMAP configuration map. And I am going to go in, I'm going to go into edit. I'm going to clear my selection, and I'm going to add a some annotation. So I'm going to add this as a 1:1 Hz scale map. I'm going to create, and in my annotation, I will add in a subdivision. And when that's done, if I open up the attributes, what you'll see is it automatically grabbed the underlying map. That's happening with an attribute rule. So the attribute rule for that is, I'm going to right click on the layer. I'm going to go to data design, and I'm going to look at that attribute rule. And that attribute rule, as you saw before, is something called get map number. And get net map number only works on insert. So the trigger for adding it means when I add a line, it's going to grab the underlying map. The reason we did that is obviously when you do a C map, you're going to want to put the map, you may want to move things across a map boundary, and that's where you want to make it happen. If you don't like that, you can change that rule. Here is the code. And it's all documented. And so basically it is grabbing from the map index, the map number, and I'm just doing a simple intersect that says that if your annotation is if the centroid is inside the map number, grab the map number. And if there is no map, it sends you an error. And if it is, it's going to return the map number to you. That's the rule. If you want to disable rules and say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to mess with rules at all, you can disable those. And I'm going to go into attribute rules. And up here at the top is a ribbon, and it says disable. Or if you want to export rules, you can export them. If you want to share rules from someone else, you can import them. One thing that when you're messing with rules is you can't be in an edit mode. So I'm going to discard that, and then I could have saved something. Another typical rule that we have is when you add tax or when you update tax lots, it's also going to modify all of the, let me turn on selection for tax lots. Editing of tax lots. I'm going to select a tax lot. Got to be able to see it to select it. I'm going to select that tax lot. I'm going to turn on the attribute rules for that tax lot. And what you can see is here's the ORMAP number at the county, the ORMAP tax lot number, my map number, the ORMAP number. And when I want to go in and let's say I wanted to change that to 2009, what you can see is automatically it changes the map tax lot number, the OR tax lot number, and the ORMAP number obviously stayed the same. So my rule said, oh, go grab the ORMAP number and just reattach, append on the end of my ORMAP number to make the OR tax lot number 2009. So let's just change that back. And it automatically changes back. So that is another set of rules. So if I go down to tax lot and I go to attribute rules again, the reason I'm bringing this one up is not everyone builds your map number the same as I do. So calc map tax lot, you may have different methods for doing this calculation. I just depended it on to the end. So at that point, if you were going to use this rule, you would have to make sure it follows your format for your naming convention. Are there questions about attribute rules? All of that is arcade. Remember our conversation this morning about arcade and how arcade was being used for labeling? Same programming language, arcade, is also used here. So all the same functions that used in labeling also get used in your attribute rules. And so those are the attribute rules that get talked about in the second page of your document. And of course, you know, some of our things is we wanted to get the map number and the map scale from the for reference lines. We want to do that for water lines, public land survey lines, cartographic lines, and so forth.
Dean?
And then down at the bottom is just a quick note. Yes.
Two things. One, I did want to go and note for attribute rules, just be aware that the attribute rules are performed sequentially from the top down. So if you're going to have things that are depending upon others, you want those to execute first. All right. And then secondly, I want to give a shout out to Dean. He was talking about how I might be having those issues with the edits because it was still in Dropbox. And I kind of dismissed that, but in fact, I did just copy my data out of Dropbox into local, and I did perform those same things, and it was working without the issue. So Dean, thank you for that. Sorry I doubted it, but yeah, so obviously I'm going to go do that from now on. Thank you, Dean.
Go Dean.
Yeah.
So the other thing about attribute rules is they're rules. They're not guidelines. You can change an attribute rule on a file geodatabase. Whoever owns it can do that. But if you put your data into SDE, or you put your data into any of the enterprise environments, so for example, if you're going to use branch versioning and the like, those rules can only be changed by the administrator. And they have to go through administrative process to do that. So just some things to think about as you move forward on that. Are there questions about attribute rules? I know we spent just the incredible amount of time of 12 minutes on this.
Hey, Dean, on the administrative rules, can they be finagled locally, or does it have to be globally?
The attribute rules, great question. The attribute rules are a database function. And as we go through this, you'll see some different things. So attribute rules are really great because then everybody who has access to the database in that layer are going to be able to use that rule consistently. Very cool, but you don't have local flexibility. If you have local flexibility that you want to implement, one of the things that you can look at is using tasks, because tasks are project-based, which means they're an individual user-based. And I'll show you some tasks that let you do some similar things. So you could, in effect, yeah. And Frank, you were going to add to that?
I was going to do two things. Just to add to that the attribute rules are defined and manipulated by the administrator of the data. So in fact, as an editor, you cannot change those rules, but as the administrator, you could modify them and reapply them, but it's not something that you can tweak between usage. It's either on or it's not. You can put some conditionals in there and tell it when to go and do that, but it gets more complicated. All right. The other thing I was just going to remind everybody is make sure that they understand that the attribute rules only work with a file geodatabase or a branched versioned portal web services. It does not work with SDE.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, because you have to go and you have to actually publish the service with validation services that are part of the publication of web services. Yeah, you cannot go and apply attribute rules against SDE. Sorry, done.
Great. No, good stuff. Any other questions about attribute rules, comments? So moving on, the next piece that we have done is that when you are going to be using the system is that we have some tools that you can use. One of those is update map index. Another is update ORMAP area. Another is zoom to map. Zoom to map was a requirement. Those of you that went to Osaka, Brian showed you that you don't even need zoom to map. You can use locate to do that. So please look at how locate works. Locate has some great options in it. We elected that we wanted to do the zoom tool. Zoom actually uses Python code. And so to do that, I'm going to open up my map. And I have all a list of all the maps. And we've got this for the whole county and it works just fine. And you can also zoom to a tax lot. And there's some options there. But the simplest thing is just to grab a map and you zoom there. And once you have a map, you could also grab a tax lot. And if you wanted to grab that tax lot in a different map, you could do that too. So it's just zooming you there. And that is using Python code and a tool that's in the tool default toolbox. And I am going to go back to where my stuff was. And sorry, I'm not a big bookmark guy because I don't want to save bookmarks. So that is one of the tools that we have that's built in. We also, and this just goes through the example of how that works, goes through more details of what you can turn off and not. So, you also
Dean?
then,
Hey,
yes,
Dean, can
Yep.
you use, say that Zoom 2 has, you have in Python, could you export that out and use that to build like Zoom to uh, uh,
anything you want.
anything you want, like
My group has,
a subdivision or something?
yeah, you could have a Zoom to subdivisions and you could then pull it off of a list. However, you take a look at locate. Locate, and if you've got questions about how Brian is using locate, Brian at Osaka was very happy to talk to folks about how he's using his stuff. Give Brian up at Yamhill County a call. Brian set his up so that in using locate, he could access the search for subdivisions and other features associated with it. But yeah, that all works fine. And to do that, and I'll get into that a little bit, is that you'd copy it. And so in this particular case, I would copy, and then I would paste it. That's my new tool. I'm renaming it to subdiv. Now you have to play some games, and you'd go into the parameters environment and the execution environment. And in this particular case, I wrote this so that all of the zooming happens using Python code, not Arcade in this particular case, within the validation process of the tools. So again, you'd have to play with that code. But yeah, but I think if you were going to zoom to subdivision and wanted that flexibility, check out locate first. But good question. Other questions?
Oh, let me go and just add that if you're going to use a parcel fabric and you have records defined as being the subdivs, that the manage records allows you to go and zoom to those records, those subdivisions, even faster than locate does. It's really amazing. Yeah.
So
manage
one
records.
of the things,
and then
one of the
search.
things that we do have is that you have search and you can search for all of that. And one of the, in the data set that you've got is that I created, and this goes back to some earlier discussions. I'd made the decision for for the demonstration data set that every map that a tax lot came from is a record because it represents your record prior to coming to ArcPro. You don't have to do this, but in this particular case, using the record tools, you could do that. Or I could use I could also search on lots more than that. And attributes that are in the record is just a standard query. I could do a new expression. And in this particular case, if I had plat name, I could search on all my plats that I used to create records. That's, I think, what Frank was getting at. And that's very quick. So in the record, and this gets back to some questions folks had about, well, why would I want to put all my stuff into a fabric? This is one of the big reasons, is all of this stuff I can search on. So any attribute that we have put, plat name, source type, comments, edit type, parcel count, all of these things are here, and I can query and zoom to them and manage them. So very good stuff. So just another way to do that. Back to my tools. Assign tax lots was a tool. We now no longer have that. We are using the ArcPro's sequential number tool. There's a cute little video that somebody, I think, can't think of it right now because I'm on a roll. But go check out the video. It's a good video. Jack Horton. Thank you, Frank. So Jack has got a whole slew of ArcPro little 3-minute, 4-minute segments. So take a look at those. Also, Jack does a better job than my little videos. So take a look at that. Update map index is actually a script, a tool that calls a Python script. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, I've got a map selected, and I am going to update map index. And in this particular case, my map number is 7530A. And this is where you're going to have to, if you're going to use this tool, someone's going to have to customize it, because in this particular case, unfortunately, the entire state of Oregon does not just use my Polk County Township 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 with leading zeros on the single digit numbers. But I could go in and let's say I wanted to change the map township to be 8. And what we decided to do is all of these pull downs where you can assign the town, range, section, quarter, section, anomalies, and suffixes, they're the things that actually drive this map number. So you're not going to go in and change this map number here. You're going to change that by changing all of this information. When you've got the number so it looks like it's supposed to look, you're going to hit run, and it's going to update the attributes for that particular one. We also elected not to change the numbers of the underlying tax lots. But again, it's just a Python script. You could grab all of the tax lots with that number and have them also be updated. Again, it's there as a minimalist approach to give you the ability to modify. But
Dean?
going back into our, yes.
Is this kind of like that kite looking tool in ORMAP?
In ORMAP, there was a tool for updating the map index, and I would have to go back to the my little spreadsheet because I've been so long since I've used ORMAP. Edit map index. So there was an edit map index tool, and we've replaced it with this. So I don't know which tool it was. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Again, I did when I wrote this 2 years ago, but I've avoided going back into ORMAP very much. But again, a tool that you can use. And to modify those pull downs and the like, you would go in to the properties for that particular tool, go to the parameters, go over here is the value list, and I can just change my numbers for my scales. I can change my numbers for my tax lot numbers, my reliable codes, and so forth. So basically, anything that's associated with this particular map, the defaults and settings are all managed right there.
Dean?
Yep.
Did you say that it updates anything that's selected?
I said
Or
it
what
did
is it
not do
updating?
that. It is just updating the map index polygon. It is not it's not updating the underlying tax lots.
Okay.
Because the underlying tax lots, and it can, the folks felt that when we developed it, they felt that was a second job that folks wanted to do and control specifically. It could. Likewise, if you have underlying rules, if you then went in and touched all those attributes, depending on how you implemented your attribute rules, it could also do more updating for you. But that's a process that you could look at. Just quickly, where that is from is that if you go into your fabric and you go into ORMAP tools, here is the update map index Python script. And again, please see this for a lot more details. I'm just trying to give you an option. Combining tax lots, Esri's got a merge tool. And there I even referenced Jack Horton on this page. Cool. So we'll take a look at Jack's split and combine tools. He's done a nice job illustrating. I've also, so again, things that you can use. The arrow tool is an add-in for the arrow tool to work, you're going to have to go to the GitHub site, download the arrow tool and add the add-in to your session. In that particular case, that is going to work for all anytime you're in ArcPro, just the way old add-ins worked. So in this particular case, I'm going to turn on my edit environment for cartographic lines. Make sure they're visible. Go back to create. And so you have a bunch of options when you do that. I'm going to do a tax lot arrow. And see these little red ones over here? They're all the ones you get to mess with. So if I went and hit arrow, I could add a single arrow. I could then change the endpoint, change where it points to. I can right click. I can finish it. I could just cancel. I can right click again and say, no, what I want to add is a zigzag arrow. And I could add in a zigzag arrow. When I've done that, I've got a bunch of options. I could have less curve, more curve. I could make it wider. So you have the abilities, and these are just standard Basel curves. So if you wanted to go in and edit them using the editor when you're done, you could do that as well. If you wanted to edit, if you wanted to add hooks, this is a hook. If you wanted to add straight arrows, which or if you wanted to edit land hooks, you can do that. Or if you wanted to edit ticks, you can do that. There's a lot of documentation on this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I'll just do the arrow tool. I mean the dimension arrow quickly. I'm going to go and put in a, where's 134 for hooks. Want to do hooks, point to point. There's my hook. I could right click. I could make them shorter. I could change the default scales. I could make them longer, so forth. I can also make them taller or smaller and mess with that. So please look at the videos, look at the documentation. In the ORMAP tools directory, there's arrow documentation that goes through many, many options here. We've got lots of options for messing around with them. Cancel numbers tool, I apologize. I don't know how the cancel number tool works, but it's there. The goal is Deschutes County put this together, Shad. He wrote the first one. It operates the same as the old one. It also is an add-in. So we couldn't figure out how to do an arrow tool or managing canceled numbers with tasks or with anything else. And so in that particular case, we ended up then saying we were going to write an add-in. Add-ins are our last tool process that we're going to use that we can't do it any other way because there's no flexibility there. We're just using it that way it is. Map production is layouts, is managed in layouts. To see layouts, you right click on layouts. You can add either a map production 18 by 20 or an 18 by 24. I'm not going to spend much time with this. Brian demonstrated that at the Osaka. He sat down and figured it all out from the layout. There's a layout for 18 by 20, 18 by 24. I know Wendy, you had talked about, and I think it was Scott from Lincoln also talked about, well, how do we do those that we want to resize? I have not looked at that. I'd be happy to work with you on that. And we can do that through an ORMAP tools grant. And DOR would fund that. So depending on how we want to handle those exception sizes, if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. But the layout is the replacement. It lets you do map production tools. Lots of different options here. And obviously needs to be customized because not every county in Oregon is named Polk County. So some things for you to look at there. So another piece is tasks. So tasks are, well, before I get that, so I've gone through add-ins, which is for working with cancel numbers and arrows. We did attribute rules so that you can relay stuff across. And I apologize, what I did not show you is that in all of the layers, and I'm sorry about that, in all of the layers, so I'm going to go to database into my data set. And I am going to turn on or open the attributes. And this is a new thing in Pro. I can open up an attribute table. And I'm going to look at it from the catalog. So I'm independent of I just went from the catalog straight to the table. And one of the things that you will see once it gets that process loaded, sorry, I grabbed one of the larger data sets, is way over here. It's who created it, the creation date and time, who last edited it, and the last edit date. Those fields are built in because when we worked on this, let's go to manage that particular layer. What you'll see is that we have global IDs turned on. Global IDs have to be turned on if you're going to do things in an enterprise environment. The next thing is that we have editor tracking turned on. And so this comes built in. And we are using a standard UTC time base. And these are the attributes that it updates. So again, that was something that we wrote in the software. This is very fun. And it tracks who did that edit. And Frank, it looks like you want to add on to that.
I just wanted to add on that not only are global IDs required for enterprise, but global IDs are required for attribute rules. So, yeah.
Good. Thank you. Questions on that? So tasks. I tried to conquer the world with tasks, so I want to add in a couple qualifiers. Tasks are a great way to simplify complex processes. So if you have something you do all the time and it takes 5 buttons to click, make a task and accumulate them. Tasks, when I started out, I was very intimidated by tasks. I watched the task videos, took the stuff, and it was like, look, I just don't get it. And the biggest problem was I was making it much harder than it was. Once I got into tasks, I was very excited. I decided, well, why not make tasks so I can manage the workflow of everything someone would want to do with a subdivision or a deed or an annexation. And I wrote this very cool 10-step process to process a subdivision. And unfortunately, you know, those doggone cartographers, Christy and Donna, they didn't want to follow my rules. And every time we did it, they had exceptions. And so originally I thought tasks were going to be a great way to do workflows. That didn't work. One of the things that's coming out in 3.1 that I'm very excited about is Esri has rewritten the workflow tools. And when I was down in California at Redlands doing the holistic testing a few weeks ago, a couple other counties in other parts of the country are actually looking pretty hard at workflows as a way to manage how a subdivision can be implemented. So I'm going to be taking a look at that. But until then, tasks are just a very nice way to simplify processes. And how do you get to tasks? Well, you go to the task in the catalog, and I'm going to open up the annotation tasks, and I've already done that. And so in this particular case, another caveat is a task is a layer specific. I've not figured out how to make it non-layer specific because some of the ways that you do stuff. So for example, if I'm going to hardwire in how I calculate an attribute gets calculated for a layer. so it is going to be layer specific. So what you're seeing are 4 groups of tasks that I've created for the different annotation scales. And in my particular case, what I was trying to replicate is a tool that John Pritchin had written. It was not part of the ORMAP tool set, but when we got into it, we found that a lot of folks were using John's annotation tools. And this is an annotation tool that you can use. So before I jump into that, this is a task. Well, let's just do it. So in this particular case, I'm going to click on that, open the task. The task is opening and it's got steps. So the first step is to add a tax lot number. So I'm going to add a tax lot number. It's already hardwired in that I want to add in a 1 to 100. So it doesn't make me select which layer I'm adding into. And in this particular case, I'm just going to add in a text value. This task assumes that you have a polygon. This task also is not written for this particular environment to recognize a branched versioning environment. Again, we wrote the tasks so that they would initially work with Pro. I have examples of how those tasks work with a branch versioning environment. Why is it different? Well, remember in branch versioning, you're grabbing, you could have a historic tax lot polygon underneath a active tax lot polygon. And we want to make sure that we grab the right overlapping polygon. But again, for this particular pilot, we wrote it this way. I've got my 2 text strings added. I go in next. I'm going to cross my fingers. Yay! In this particular case, it went in and added the 2 points, the 2 strings, and then it grabbed the underlying polygon using the same kind of arcade code. And to look at arcade code, I'm going to edit this task in Designer. And here's the task itself. And it's just, I wrote some annotation. I wrote a descriptor for it. I'm going to hit the right arrow, and in Design, I can look at the first step. And the first step just let me add that particular add tax lot anno. And to do that, again, please go into how to design a tax lot. But basically what I did is I hit this record button and just went in and grabbed the add button under the create, and that added that task to it. The next step was a little more complicated. And in that particular case, I wanted to run a calculate. And some things I wanted to do was make sure I had some things done beforehand. So I wanted to make sure prior to it running that it only ran on the features selected. It only ran on, and it grabbed if the layer had annotation associated with it. So if you didn't add any, I didn't want to arrow out. I just wanted to move past it. And the calculate command, for those that are, psyched about arcade, look at, this is just the calculate command, nothing special. It's what you would do is if you hit calculate on a particular selected record for a field. I'm going to edit the tax lot. I'm calculating on the table tax lot anno. I'm going to calculate the text string, and the arcade expression I'm going to use is just down here. And it is identical to an attribute rule. So remember earlier where you're talking about, well, can I turn them on or off? You can make a task to do what we had done before. And these tasks are specific to this APRX file, specific to this project file. They are, then people can turn them off. They can modify them. In fact, John's cartographers up in Clackamas County, he's thinking they could make their own tasks because each person then could have their own project file. They'd have all their own shortcuts. The other thing about tasks that are very interesting is I'm going to go back to design on this one. And what you can see is it is view specific. So this task is going to run on the configuration map, this specific map. And with that, I can automatically turn on all the layers I see and all the layers I edit. So remember from looking at the contents tab, same list by drawing. Can I select or not select? Can I turn on labels? Can I not turn on labels? And so forth. So all of that, whether you can edit or not, is all turned on. So if you have a complex task that, for example, one of the tasks that we wrote is to edit annotation. So I only want to edit 1 to 100 anno. I also want to edit the anno for the tax lots and so forth. This particular one only turns on the edit features that I want to edit and gives me a little edit palette. So I run this particular task. It lets me just get to the anno and I can select a feature. It lets me change it, or let's say I want to move it. It's just a little palette that when I'm done and I can finish up. So again, it is a shortcut, and that's what these work very well on. Another one to do is putting parentheses or taking parentheses away. I can select a feature. I think I left myself. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Gotta clear my selection. I left myself in process on the other task. And one of the things when you leave a task and blow it up partway through, as I did, it leaves you in some of your edit states. In this particular case, I've got it selected. It's going to take it off. If I run the next time, it's going to put the parentheses back. And that assumed I had features selected. So my mistake. It's been a long time since I used the parentheses. The add CMAP also is another one of those tasks that take a while to, that adding CMAP so it's got the right map number on the right side is a drag. And there is documentation for that particular task. Again, all of this is in the documentation on how to do it, how to play with the different anno tools. Please take a look at that. There's videos for all of those. Adding CMAPs, I always have to check add CMAPs because I usually do it wrong. So the first thing you do with add CMAPs is I want to select the map index polygon of the adjacent map. So, so in this particular case, if I want to add CMAPs, I want to add a CMAP here for this 1 to 400 scale map. So in that particular case, I want to add a 1 to 400 CMAP on this 1 to 100 map. So what I'm going to do is hit add CMAP. First thing I'm going to do is select the polygon. So that's the polygon. It's grabbing and building the CMAP text string. I'm now going to add it to the map I want to add it. Now remember, I have attribute rules turned on. So I want this map to be, this annotation string to be associated with the map it's on top of. And the nice thing about that is it's going to grab and build that value from the underlying polygon at the correct scale. But now what I want to do is actually want to move it. And remember that attribute rule only had trigger turned on when you added it. It didn't turn on and grab the underlying map number. So this piece of annotation is now selected with this map number, even though it's on the adjacent. That's why that's one of the things we have to do with CMAPs. So that's an example of how the task interacts with the rule to help you put a feature on. And it's just a fast way to do it. I don't have to mess with turning stuff on, editing things, calculating things. And those are the different examples of what tasks do to simplify the process. So again, GitHub, links for all the stuff. Tools, just a quick overview. So if you want to say, well, where was that tool? What was he talking about? That's all there. I walk through first the attribute rules that are driven by Arcade, the zoom to map, and the potential of using locate. Again, one of the standard ORMAP tools. And then just a brief description on customization. Assigning tax lots is handled in ARC Pro now automatically. Updating map index is a tool that calls a Python script. Shows you how to customize it. Combined tax lots, built and merge and segs, splits, whatever you want to call them, are built into the ORMAP tools. The arrow and the canceled numbers are add-ins. In order for them to work, you have to download the code and follow the directions that are with them to how to install an add-in. Map production is handled with layouts. And one of the things I thought about doing at some point is to actually do a class where we spend and open it up to all the cartographers. And I can do that as a tools project with ORMAP. And we can record it, but we can have a class and maybe get Brian to help out on how to edit and change the layout. So when I'm done, just running through this, I'd really like to know, do you guys want to spend a couple hours some afternoon or morning in a Zoom where we just walk through how to change it? And part of that is then you would change my Polk County map to better represent your map, whether it's a 22 inch or a 24-inch map. And what you saw is that export's not done yet. We went through tasks, which are best representing with annotation tasks, which rely on Arcade, which is similar to Arcade and attribute rules. We went through all of them. And then we talked, one of the things I did not show you, because I'm still, it's currently in remodification. When you take the add anno tool from labels and move that to 3.0 Pro and 3.1 Pro, I have found a bug in the append command, which I think is a bug, sorry. Esri has replicated my problem and is seeing if it's more widespread than I think. So I'm in the process of rewriting that to better to work in 3.0 and 3.1 with enterprise environment. Talked a little bit about customizing annotation tasks. And again, there's a task overview on all of these, which is available on YouTube. Whew. And we have a whole 9 minutes, Frank, to have a conversation. I know that was very fast. Again, this is a Parcel Fabric class, but based after the last meeting, the last class we did, folks wanted me to just go through and hit all these. All of these are documented. They're available online. All of these have individual YouTube videos that says this is how this works. And then there's just an example flow that walks through every step of how you would use these tools to, for example, do a partition. And that video is something you can stop rather than listening to me crank through on how fast that is. And Frank, if you want me to take questions in the morning regarding this, if anybody has them, I don't want to, your time is valuable. We can all get back together as ORMAP folks and following up. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and
if you're going to be here in the morning, why don't we wait until the morning and have questions as part of that early discussion, the homework on there. All right.
Sounds great. I'm going to be here. I'll participate until about 10:30. It's at that point I got to head off to other things.
Perfect. A couple more things. I just checked while you were doing that. And sorry, I was multitasking. I was just checking at the latest 3.1 beta, which is beta 3. They're not at Gold Master yet, but they did not have that task for the subdivisions in there. So it looks like it may not meet, it may not get out there for 3.1. All right. What you're seeing here is, in fact, I have copied the data out of Dropbox, put it up on my local drive, and I think, fingers crossed, that we're going to be able to go and finish that discussion about aligned parcels. Again, I have a parcel here that's defined. I have now opened up and done aligned parcels. There's my parcel. I've gone and told it that that's my tolerance, and I want to make sure my tolerance is big enough. And if I look at this, I haven't told it to generate yet, so I don't see any preview, but it should go and bring point to point with this part, but not here. So I'm going to go and tell it to go ahead and create it there and generate these. So it now will show me, in fact, where that's going to go. And in fact, where it's supposed to go and align everything else up in there. I can toggle back and forth on there. And I'm looking here, and why is this one not moving? This one should in fact be moving. If I generate a link in here, just say take that and put it here. And let's see what actually happens here. So if I can and do
Frank,
that.
it's 55.82 and your tolerance was 55.
Thank you. Thank you. So in fact, you do want to make sure that the linkages show up correctly on here. And let me go and also demonstrate the align features just so that we can check and see to show you. And I don't need to do 55 in here. It should be about, you know, I can leave it at that, but just something smaller. And I'm going to go and just say, and show you how align features works. And again, this is about taking all the vertices, the points, the lines, and the polygons, and moving them into that one single path. All right. So it works that way. We could also go and as I do it up to here and move over to here, we can see that that's not going to move over here because I'm nowhere near. Is it big enough? Let's just go and make it a little bit bigger to make sure that it goes and realigns all of that at the same time. The tools, especially align features, to go and handle edge matching, to handle gaps and overlaps and everything. They're so much nicer than they used to be. I can go in here and I can tell it to take and all of these corners, go and take them and replace them all to number 3 and have it go and reduce all those. So again, just sort of a reminder, you're going to make sure that it does work. I apologize that I was working it out of Dropbox and it wasn't working well. I've now learned that I think Dropbox may have changed some of the settings on it recently.
So Frank, just to clarify for me, if I don't have Fabric implemented, because right now what you said is, and I hadn't thought about this before, and I'm sorry, is that your tax lot lines got updated, my tax lot points got updated, and my tax lot polygon got updated. Whereas if I used a line, but I did not have Fabric implemented, would all of those be aligned, or just the currently edited version be aligned?
So the alignment components on here, depending upon what you've got set up for topology. Again, with align features, I tend to not have topology turned on with align features. And I'm going to do a path here. And I'm just going to draw this path. I want to tell it to go and take all the vertices within this path. And let's make sure it's big enough. Jeez. All right. I should have been a little bit closer on here. I want to make sure that all the vertices are included within there. By the way, notice this down here. I would have also moved that point over. Anything that's within this path, if I have it set up to allow it, every layer that's turned on will get moved. All right. So if I were to go and do this now, it would go and move all of that so that it's adjacent to that path. Okay, again, this point got moved. The lines got moved. The lines connected to that point got moved. The polygons got changed. These polygons got changed. So just be aware that it changes the vertices of everything that's within that tolerance,
Thank you.
whether or not it's a fabric or not.
Yep, thanks.
Line features tool is, wow, amazing how it works. All right. We are now at noon, your time. So we finished for the day. We are going to meet again tomorrow, and we're going to go through some additional slides. We may not finish all the slides, but they are all in there for you to download and look at, and just sort of give you a hint of the parcel fabric. And please, questions, things that you learned today. The number one thing is don't keep it in Dropbox, take it out of Dropbox. And Dean did a great job on the tools. I'm impressed by the tools. I can share with Dean. He and I have the same reaction with tasks because they are not flexible. They need to develop some sort of flexibility inside the task. If you're going to do the same task the same way every single time, they're great. But as a cartographer, as a tax mapper, a tax parcel mapper, it's tough to do the same thing every time because you have so many different variables in there. All right. Any other comments? Any other questions? By the way, Robin, you wanted me to look and do the PLSS in the morning. I'll go and I'll pull up the PLSS and I will show you how to go and take and add attribute fields over to the parcel fabric. I might actually just go and create one from scratch first thing in the morning for you. All right.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions or any requests for tomorrow? And I wish you a good night. I'll see you first thing in the morning. All right.
See ya.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.